For 400 years, the galaxy actually worked. That is the part of the story almost nobody ever tells you about. The High Republic era began around 500 years before the Battle of Yavin and ran until roughly 100 BBY. That is about 4 centuries of galactic history, and it sits inside the much longer stretch of time known as the Republic era. What makes this window special is that the Galactic Republic was at the very top of its powers. It was the closest the galaxy ever came to a government that most people trusted, in a time when things were unusually steady. 3 ideas defined the whole period: expansion, exploration, and new science. The Republic wanted to grow. It wanted to see what was out there, and it wanted to build things nobody had built before. This same window has another name attached to it, and that name is the Golden Age of the Jedi. The Order was at its height, and the version of the Jedi living in this period would look strange to anyone who only knows the prequel films. They were spread out across the galaxy instead of clustered on one world. They were open in a way that later generations were not, welcoming a wide range of people, beliefs, and ways of connecting to the Force. The Order was described as accepting, and it meant it. There is one detail here that matters more than anything else, because the entire era eventually turns on it. The Jedi were a separate organization from the Republic. They worked alongside the government, and they helped it whenever they were asked. But they were never the Republic's army. They had their own leadership, their own rules, and their own reasons for doing things. That separation is the political tension that runs underneath every single event in this story, and it never fully gets resolved. 435 years after the era ended, in the days of the Resistance and the First Order, people were still talking about it. The High Republic was remembered as the most prosperous stretch in all of galactic history, and that reputation survived the Clone Wars, the Empire, and everything that came after. So the obvious question is why? Why did this particular age get to be so peaceful when almost no other age did? The answer is that nobody was fighting the Jedi. By the time this era started, the Order believed the Sith had been wiped out completely in a battle fought more than 500 years earlier, around 1032 BBY. That ancient enemy was finished and filed away as history. They were completely wrong about that. The Sith survived through a single figure named Darth Bane, who rebuilt his order around a new rule. From that point forward, there would only ever be 2 Sith at a time, one master and one apprentice, passing power down in secret instead of building armies that could be seen coming. The Jedi did eventually learn that Bane existed. They confronted his line and came away believing they had ended it for good. That mistaken belief is what opened the door to the Golden Age. With no dark side rival to hunt, the Jedi were free to be explorers and diplomats and healers instead of warriors. The peace was real, and the prosperity was real, and all of it was sitting on top of a false conclusion. The Golden Age of the galaxy was built on a mistake. It also created a weakness that showed up much later. Because there was no Sith activity to respond to, the Order slowly got comfortable. They grew relaxed about hunting down dark side threats, and that relaxed attitude is exactly what allowed dark side plots to grow quietly in the background. By 132 BBY, when a Sith acolyte scheme was unfolding in the shadows, The Jedi were nowhere near as sharp as they once had been. Now, back to the beginning of it all. Around 500 BBY, the Republic made a decision that shaped the next several centuries. It would push its influence past the core worlds and the colonies, out into the greater Outer Rim territories. This push was formally called the Age of Exploration, and it lasted until roughly 330 BBY. The part of the Outer Rim that the Republic had not yet reached had a name of its own. It was called the Galactic Frontier, and life there was hard. Without Republic influence, frontier worlds dealt with shortages, hardship, and very little help from anyone. The Republic set up a body called the Office of the Frontier to handle this, which gave frontier peoples and planets a formal way to apply for aid from either the Republic itself or from the Jedi Order. There was also a practical pressure driving all of this. The core worlds and the colonies had become overcrowded, so a lot of poorer citizens started making the long trip out to the Outer Rim looking for something better. The frontier was dangerous, and everybody knew it, and people went anyway. That migration pattern becomes very important later on. While the Republic was looking outward, something small and quiet was taking root on a distant world, and it would eventually reshape the galaxy. A priest named Sashar Rold served with the Guardians of the Wheels on the moon of Jedha. At some point, he broke away from that order entirely, traveled to a planet called Dalna, and founded a group called the Path of the Open Hand. We know this group existed by 483 BBY because their own records place the founding more than a century before the events of 382 BBY. Their belief was startling in how simple it was. Nobody at all should use the Force for any reason whatsoever. In their view, using the Force was the same as abusing it, and every act of abuse caused disaster and suffering somewhere else in the galaxy. The Force, they taught, was trapped, and it needed to be set free. Follow that logic to the end, and you arrive at the conclusion the Path arrived at. If using the Force causes harm, then the beings who use it most are the beings causing the most harm, which made the Jedi Order, in Path teaching, the single greatest source of damage in the entire galaxy. The Jedi were the enemy, and there was no version of this belief where that changed. The irony of where this came from is hard to miss. Sasha Rold walked away from a Force tradition on Jedha, a moon known for many faiths living peacefully beside each other, and built a creed that flipped that idea completely upside down. The Path had its own internal shape too. Members earned full membership at the age of 15. Children being raised inside the group were called Littles. The person in charge held the title of Guide, and a second senior figure held the title of Herald. Those titles are worth remembering. Meanwhile, the Jedi were running their order in ways that would be unthinkable to Jedi of later centuries. Some Jedi became Way-Seekers. A Way-Seeker was a Jedi who did not answer to the Jedi Council at all, and instead wandered the galaxy, following wherever the Force seemed to lead them. The Order permitted this. There is no version of that arrangement in the days of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Mace Windu, and it tells you how loose and how confident the Order was during this time. There was also the Barash Vow. In 382 BBY, a Jedi named Barash Sylvain originated a practice that let Jedi step away from everything and live as isolated hermits, spending all of their time trying to listen for the Force and rebuild their connection to it. That same vow was still being taken thousands of years later, most famously by Eno Cordova during the days of the Empire. The Order also spread itself out on purpose. Instead of gathering everything on Coruscant, the Jedi kept temples and outposts scattered across the galaxy. Elfrona, Banshee, Takodana, Chespia, Valo, Corellia, and Dalna all had a Jedi presence. And leading the Order through much of this period was a familiar face. Yoda was Grand Master, and by 382 BBY, he was already around 500 years old. He is standing in the background of nearly this entire story, watching it unfold from beginning to end. Back on Jedha, something remarkable was happening. Jedha during this era was a destination for spiritual travelers from across the galaxy. Many different Force religions lived there side by side, mostly in peace, and the moon earned a reputation as a place of balance, cooperation, and light. A few years before 382 BBY, that reputation turned into an institution. A body called the Convocation of the Force was established there, built to help the different faiths understand each other and work together. Sources differ slightly on how new it was, so the safest way to describe it is recently established. The groups with representatives seated on the convocation included the Jedi Order, the Guardians of the Whills, the Disciples of the Whills, the Church of the Force, the Falanasi, the Lonto, the Matukai, and the Sorcerers of Tund. Shortly into its existence, the convocation was chaired by Representative Kilan Tadara of the Church of the Force. They met in the convocation chambers in Jedha City, the Holy City, in a building that faced the Square of the Supplicants. One group had no seat and no presence there whatsoever. The Path of the Open Hand was nowhere on Jedha. Around 392 BBY, the Republic was being run by two people at once. Kyong Greylock and Orlan Molo served together as co-chancellors, which is an arrangement you will not find anywhere else in galactic history. They split the work between them. Greylock was the political one, staying mostly on Coruscant and handling the daily business of government. Molo, a Quarren, traveled the outer reaches of the Republic and kept an eye on how things were actually going out there. Working with the Jedi Order, the two of them launched something called the Outer Rim Exploration Teams, better known as Pathfinder Teams. Their job had three parts: find new hyperspace routes, make contact with planets that had been isolated from everyone else, and build a working communications network across the Outer Rim. A standard Pathfinder team was a small group with a specific makeup. There was a pilot, a Jedi Master, a Jedi Padawan, a medic, an EX communication droid, and a GT droid. That EX droid was the key to the whole operation. There was no instant messaging across the frontier, so those droids physically flew through space, carrying messages back to the communications teams supporting the Pathfinders. The Republic's answer to long-distance communication in the Outer Rim was a droid in a starship, making the trip in person. Hold on to that detail. About 160 years later, a Jedi Master named Porter Engel takes one of those outdated X-droids and uses it to slip a message through a blockade that nothing else can get past, precisely because the technology is so old that nobody thought to watch for it. Around 383 BBY, all of this exploration hit a fever pitch in an event called the Great Hyperspace Rush. Hyperspace prospecting had become wildly popular. Prospectors flew into uncharted space and gambled everything on finding a safe lane through hyperspace that nobody had mapped yet. It was a gold rush, except the gold was a root. Two families in particular got enormously wealthy and powerful off of it: the Santeca clan and the Graf family. That first name should sound familiar, because the Santecas were still a presence in the galaxy more than 350 years later, when Lord Santeca opened the story of the Resistance. The frontier had almost no organized communication networks, so news traveled badly, and rumors traveled well. Tall tales spread about strange planets and enormous creatures waiting in the dark. One of those stories described a paradise world called Planet X, and people were still whispering about it from around 400 BBY onward. Piracy was a constant problem out there. The Republic's reach only went so far, and beyond that line, pirates operated freely. The most famous of them all was the Pirate Queen, Maz Kanata, who welcomed the galaxy's most notorious scoundrels to her castle on Takodana. The stories about Maz and that castle were spread mostly by a prospector named Dexter Jettster, who is the very same Dexter Jettster who later runs a diner and helps Obi-Wan Kenobi identify a dart. Both belong to long-lived species, and both were here in this era doing all of this. The Galactic Society of Creature Enthusiasts was also founded during this period, started by scientists and adventurers, cataloging the new species they were finding on frontier worlds. It began as small dinner meetings and a monthly newsletter, and over centuries it grew into one of the largest supporters of wilderness preservation and education anywhere, producing HoloNet programming and commissioning safari droids from Serv-O-Droid Incorporated. Two more places were touched by this age and then left behind. Tanalorr, the hidden world that Cal Kestis eventually reaches, was discovered during this era and discussed as a possible place to train younglings before an attack left it abandoned for centuries. And the shattered moon above Kobo was broken apart by an event that has not happened yet in our story. That is the Golden Age. A galaxy exploring itself, an order at its most open, two chancellors sharing one chair, and a republic reaching further than it ever had before, and three quiet fuses already burning. A cult on Dalna teaching that the Jedi are the problem. A gold rush pushing ships into space nobody has mapped. And a republic pressing into a frontier that never asked it to come. Two Republic ships came to save a star system, and the first thing they did was slam into each other. That crash is where the Golden Age starts to crack open. So let us back up and look at how a single system got that desperate in the first place. Eiram and Erono are twin planets circling one star, tucked away in the outer rim. On a map, they look like a pair of neighbors who got lucky. In practice, they had been circling each other with weapons drawn for generations. The reason was location. Their system worked as a hyperspace waypoint, which made it genuinely valuable to anyone traveling that stretch of space, and both worlds wanted control of it. Neither one was willing to share, and neither one was willing to walk away. What makes this feud different from a normal border dispute is how long it had been going. There was not one war between these worlds. There were many, stacked one on top of the other across generations, and after enough of them, the people living there stopped seeing it as a conflict that could end. It became the shape of their lives. The name attached to it says everything you need to know. They called it the Forever War, and the official records listed as the Eiram and Erono War. Ordinary citizens on both worlds grew up learning nothing but resentment for the people across the sky. The two planets could not be more different, and that difference is a big part of why they could never let go of each other. Eiram is a water world covered in oceans, with desalination systems and cities protected under great domes. Its capital is Erasmus Capital City. Erono is the opposite. It is dry, cracked, and short on water, and its population survives on shipments of ice brought in from elsewhere. One world has more water than it can use. The other one is thirsty. That imbalance sits underneath everything they ever fought about. The most recent round of fighting ran from 387 BBY to 382 BBY, 5 years of it. This one started the way a lot of long conflicts start, with an accident nobody wanted. Prince Nico Albaran of Erono was on a diplomatic mission when he was lost over Eiram's oceans. It was not an attack, and it was not planned by anyone. His father, the monarch Albaran, did not see it that way. Grief turned into policy, and the monarch threw himself into the war harder than before. Here is who was in charge as that 5th year arrived. On Erono, monarch Albaran ruled, and his surviving heir was Princess Ziri Albaran. Ziri was not decorating a throne room somewhere. She was a captain in Thyli Fire Squadron and flew combat missions herself. Pushing the monarch toward the hardest possible line was Viceroy Ferrell, along with his son Reverend Ferrell. On Eiram, Queen Adriala ruled beside Queen Consort Odelia. Their heir was Prince Fan Tuzen, who had been adopted into the family. Their military, the Eirami Navy, answered to General Nivan Lao. By this point, both worlds were running on empty. Supplies were thinning out on each side, and the damage was spilling past their own system. The fighting was creating serious problems for other planets across that whole region of the Outer Rim, and that is finally what pulled the Galactic Republic in. Not sympathy for either side, practical trouble for everyone nearby. Then Princess Ziri did something nobody expected from a combat pilot. She brokered a ceasefire. Her reasons were entirely practical. Erono badly needed a shipment of ice for its people, and Eiram had put in a request to the Republic for medical aid. Both deliveries needed a pause in the shooting to arrive safely, so a pause is what she arranged. The choreography mattered enormously. Ziri and Thyla Fire Squadron were scheduled to receive the ice hauler first, and only after that would General Lao's forces meet the incoming Republic mission. The order of operations was the entire point, because neither side trusted the other 1 inch, and nobody wanted to be caught looking vulnerable at the wrong moment. It fell apart in seconds. The ice hauler showed up late. At almost the exact same moment, 2 Republic long-beam cruisers dropped out of hyperspace together. The first was the Valiant, carrying a Jedi relief mission and Eiram's medical supplies. The second was the Paxion, the personal cruiser of Chancellor Orlan Mollo, who had shown up unannounced with the goal of talking both sides into a lasting peace. The 2 Republic ships hit each other. The hauler swerved to avoid the mess and drifted straight into Eiram's gravity well. Sit with that image for a second, because it says more about this era than any speech could. The Republic's peace mission arrived, collided with itself, and very nearly wrecked the very people it came to help. good intentions from the outside, making a bad situation worse. That pattern repeats for the next several centuries. Chiri's starfighter went down in the chaos and dropped into Eiram's ocean. Fan Tu Zen saw it happen. He went into the water after her, found her trapped in the wreckage, and used her own ceremonial Baneblade to cut her loose. He hauled her to shore. She thanked him by attacking him. She got the dagger to his throat, and when Eirami guards came running, she turned the blade on herself instead. Fan Tu talked her back from it with a promise. He told her she would get an audience with Queen Adriala. He kept the promise. In that meeting, Adriala played 2 recordings for the princess. The first was from Monarch Albaran, warning that he would tear Eiram apart if his daughter was not sent home. The second was from Chancellor Orlen Molo, inviting Adriala aboard the Paxion to sit across a table from Albaran and negotiate. Ciri agreed to go. Fan Tu went with her, and it was the first time in his life he had ever left his home world. The summit took place aboard the Paxion, parked in the space between the 2 planets. Queen Adriala brought her family. Monarch Albaran brought his advisors. Both sides sat down. The first days accomplished almost nothing. Viceroy Ferrell worked the room the entire time, needling the monarch back toward his hardest positions whenever the temperature started to drop. The breakthrough came from outside the negotiating table entirely. Chiri, who had been thrown together by a rescue neither of them planned, met by chance and came up with an idea of their own. They would marry each other. The heir of Erono joined to the heir of Eiram, with the hope that tying the 2 royal houses together would hold a peace that no treaty had managed. Jedi were assigned to the crisis as well. One of them was Jedi Knight Gela Nate, a wayseeker who answered to the Force instead of to any council. Tangled up in the whole affair was Axel Greylark, son of co-chancellor Keong Greylark, whose presence complicates matters considerably, because the peace did not go smoothly. Both delegations traveled to Erono for Seguru's funeral. Afterward, the Eirami delegation was pelted with stones by protesters who wanted the war to continue. They called themselves the Children of Erono. Chiri and Fan Tu answered that with a public tour of Erono, traveling with Natai and Greylark alongside them. The tour had 2 purposes. One was to win over ordinary people who had spent their whole lives being told the other planet was the enemy. The other was to make the couple visible enough that anyone plotting against them would be tempted to make a move. It worked on both counts. Public feeling shifted, and the operation exposed how much of the disruption traced back to the Ferals. Later, during a fight with bounty hunters, Axel Greylark set off explosions in 2 of the towers, generating the dome over Erasmus' capital city. The protection failed, and the water came in, flooding the capital. Reverend Ferrell and the Children of Erono attacked in the middle of it, and they brought the Paxion down out of the sky and into the sea. And still, somehow, the wedding happened. It took place in 382 BBY in 2 parts. The first ceremony was held at the Rook on Erono. The second was held in Erasmus' capital city on Eiram, so that both worlds could claim it as their own. Delegations came from across the galaxy to watch, including representatives from Naboo, Moncala, Korea, Lasan, and Toydaria. Ciri wore a dress in red, pink, and gold that had belonged to her mother. colored like a sunset over Erono. The marriage was arranged for political reasons, and it did not stay that way. Shiri and Fan too actually fell for each other, and their partnership becomes one of the steadiest things in the years that follow. Two young people from opposite sides of a war their families had inherited, choosing each other on purpose. That is the version of events the galaxy saw. There was another version running underneath it. While the war was still going, Queen Adriala of Eiram had made a private arrangement with a woman known as the Mother, the leader of the Path of the Open Hand. The deal was straightforward. The Path would send Eiram supplies. In exchange, Eiram would hand over a poison made from a scorpion found on their own world. The Mother wanted two things out of this, and only one of them was the poison. The first goal was obvious enough. She wanted that substance in her possession for purposes of her own. The second goal was the dangerous one. She wanted the war twisted in a direction where the Jedi took the blame for what happened. If the Order could be made to look like the villains of this conflict, then public opinion across the region would turn against them, and the group that believed Jedi were the root of all harm in the galaxy would suddenly have a much easier time convincing people. Eiram told the Republic and the Jedi that the poison had been destroyed. That was a lie, and the substance was still sitting exactly where they had left it. The Path was collecting more than poison out of this arrangement. They also picked up enforcer droids through Graf family interests, who had been supplying Eiram separately. None of this was passive. The Path fed the war on purpose, feeding the flames of a conflict that had been burning for generations, and used the misery it created to bring in new members and widen their reach. For the Mother, the Forever War was a recruiting tool and a testing ground at the same time. Far from that system, a second thread was moving in the same year, and it will end up mattering just as much. Outer Rim Expedition 252 was lost on a planet called Gloam after a betrayal from inside. Only one member survived, Jedi Master Rock Buran, and he managed to get a distress signal out before his situation got any worse. A Pathfinder team's damaged communications droid turned up drifting in space carrying a message nobody could fully make sense of. Jedi Master Silandra Sho and her Padawan Rupa Nitani were sent to find the missing team. The trail led them to Gloam, a world buried under smog with a reputation for monsters out of old stories. It also led them to its twin Obadas, home to a species called the Katikut, whose city had gone missing. There were other people stuck on Gloam. Prospectors Spence Lefbrook and his young son Das had teamed up with another prospector named Radikaz Sunshine Dobbs to chart a route to the Paradise World that people had been whispering about for centuries, Planet X. During that attempt, their ship, the Silver Streak, was damaged. Dobbs offered them a way off the planet in exchange for half of the reward. The Lefbrooks took the deal. He left them stranded there anyway. Father and son survived on cooked lizards and spent every night in a reinforced cave, hiding from whatever moved around outside. A scavenged distress beacon was the only thing they had that resembled hope. Sho and her Padawan reached them, got them out along with Rock Buran, and uncovered what had really been happening on Gloam, including the city hidden beneath its surface. The most important thing to come off that planet had nothing to do with the rescue. Sunshine Dobbs had actually reached Planet X, and he had brought something back with him. That object is the fuse that eventually burns down this entire era. Later that same year came the Hyperspace Chase, a race sponsored jointly by the Santeca clan and the Graf family. The prize went to whoever could chart and sell the most safe hyperspace lanes. Das Lefbrook, now 12 years old and living on Batu at Black Spire Outpost, signed on with the crew of Sky Graf. Sky came from the Graf family and was flying their brother's ship, the Brightbird. Together, they recruited Rupa Nitani, who was 15, telling her it was about the race. The race was cover. What they actually wanted was to find Planet X again. Their reasons were personal. Das wanted to recover recordings of his mother that were still sitting aboard the marooned Silverstreak. Sky was holding on to the hope that their father had survived crashing there. Their method was a graph compass, a device that could point someone toward a place they wanted to reach as long as they carried something from that location. Sky's theory was that Das counted, having stood on the planet himself, and that Rupa's sensitivity to the Force would be enough to make the device work. They never found out. Rupa's master called her back before they could finish, and the search was abandoned. Silandra Sho was recalling her Padawan to a planet named Dalna. Every long story in this galaxy has one moment where a small thing turns into a permanent thing. For the High Republic, that moment happens on a quiet farming world nobody was paying attention to. By 382 BBY, the Path of the Open Hand had been headquartered on Dalna for roughly 100 years, which meant they had been there almost as long as the settlement itself. Dalna was newly settled at this point, a fresh outer rim world where people were still figuring out where the road should go. The path fit right into that quiet. Officially, they were an extremist missionary order, and the records that survive call them a cult. To one family who would carry their memory for generations afterward, they were remembered by a much softer word. They were the faithful. Their belief had not changed since the day it was founded. Using the Force was the same as abusing it, and every act of abuse rippled out into disaster somewhere else in the galaxy. The Force had to be freed from the people capable of touching it. That belief points in exactly one direction when you follow it far enough, and the path followed it. The Jedi were the enemy. What makes their reasoning so unsettling is that the path did not consider the Jedi wicked. They considered them capable. The Jedi were the largest group of skilled Force users in existence, which in path teaching made them the largest source of harm in existence, and none of their good intentions changed that math. The group had a compound on Dalna and a ship called the Gaze Electric, and that vessel becomes one of the most consequential things in this entire era. The woman running all of it was named Elysia Zeveron, though almost nobody used that name. Her followers called her the Mother. She was a human female who had come out of the core worlds and arrived at the Dalna headquarters as a refugee. She rose anyway, and she rose fast. What lifted her was her visions. She described what the Force showed her, and the members around her decided they were living beside a prophet. Within a short span, she had pushed aside the man who had been running things, a figure called the Herald, whose name was Worth Plouth, and taken the leadership for herself. Then she started expanding, aggressively, pushing the path outward in ways it never had been before. She sharpened the group's existing belief into something harder, and she carried a personal dislike of the Jedi Order that went well beyond doctrine. Now for the part that makes this whole arc collapse in on itself. Elysia Zeveron could use the Force. She had hidden abilities, including the power to shape what people thought by speaking to them, and she used those abilities over and over again in private while preaching in public that all Force use was an abomination. Her visions were not real, and she had invented every last one of them. The prophet at the head of the movement dedicated to freeing the Force was lying to every single person who followed her, and she was doing it with the exact power they had given up their lives to reject. There is one more detail that turns this from hypocrisy into something closer to tragedy. She had a sister and her sister was a Jedi Knight named Olivia Zeveron, stationed on Jedha. The two of them cross paths only briefly, much later, during the fighting on that moon. The encounter pokes at Olivia's memories and leaves her with a bad feeling she cannot place. And then it passes. Underneath the mother were two young cousins who matter more to galactic history than any senator alive at the time. Marda was an Everini female, roughly 15 years old, and she had only recently become a full member of the Path, since full membership arrived at 15. Her assigned role was caretaker for the Littles, which was what the Path called the children in its care. People described her as quiet, cool, and collected, and she believed in the mother without a shred of doubt. Her cousin Yana was Everini as well, and Yana had spent the last 5 years quietly thinking about leaving. That means Yana had been a member since at least 387 BBY and had been unconvinced for most of it. One cousin was the believer, and one was the skeptic. That inversion is the engine of everything that follows, because the galaxy would have been far better off if it had gone the other way around. To understand why either of them ended up on Dalna, you have to understand what the Everini had lived through. For about a decade before they arrived, the two girls lived on a planet in the expansion region called Genesia, alongside their mothers, Yana's sire, and their grandparents. The family was attacked by the townspeople around them. Marda's sire fought fiercely to buy enough time for both girls and their mothers to get away. Marda has no memory of that night at all. Yana remembers all of it. That gap in memory shapes both of them for the rest of their lives. The wider history of their species is grimmer than one bad night. The Everini were declared outlaws and hunted across the galaxy following attacks on starships, and their numbers dropped severely because of it. The ones who lived through that learned a specific set of survival skills. They learned to lie, to deceive, and to steer other people without those people noticing. What they held on to through all of it was a self-image as caretakers, except the definition narrowed until it only covered their own. There is a story that captures it perfectly. An Everini woman offers to share her wine with strangers gathered around a campfire, and once the wine has done its work, she gathers up everything her hosts owned and walks away. The species carries one other trait that nothing else in the galaxy shares. Everini can be haunted by specters of the departed, which are not Force ghosts and have nothing to do with the Force at all. That trait becomes extremely important for Marda later on. Both girls were eventually abandoned by their own mothers, which left them alone with the only family left standing, and that family was the Path. The thing that turns this cult into a galactic catastrophe arrives in the hands of a prospector. Radika's Sunshine Dobbs, the same man who left a father and son stranded on Gloam, had actually reached the paradise world he had been chasing. Planet X had a true name, and that name was Sophros. He came back from it carrying something that looked like a jewel, and he assumed it was a very large gemstone. Dobbs had a side business fencing Force artifacts, which is how his path and the mother's had already crossed, and by this point she had him completely under her influence. In 382 BBY, she brought him in on a job. She wanted him to help her track down the scattered pieces of a set of 3 rods, Force artifacts she wanted badly for reasons she did not share. While they were doing business, she took the jewel off his hands as well. The rods were the real prize. The mother sent the Path's operatives, known as the Children, to Hynestia Prime to take the artifact called the Rod of Seasons from the Hynestian royal family. The mission went exactly the way she wanted. They carried the rod back to Dalna, and with that the mother held 1/3 of something considerably larger. Put all 3 rods together, and they form a single object called the Rod of Power. On their own and combined, those rods share one specific function that nobody on Dalna fully appreciated yet. They can control the Nameless. She had acquired the leash before anyone in the galaxy knew there was an animal. Losing a royal artifact is the kind of thing that gets noticed. The Queen of Hynestia went to the Jedi Order and asked them to find the rod and bring it home. The Order assigned Jedi Master Zala Makri and her Padawan Kevmo Zink, a Pantoran, to work out where it had gone. Their investigation walked them straight to Dalna, and it walked Kevmo Zink into Marda Row. The two of them were immediately taken with each other, at a moment when the timing could not have been worse. He was a Jedi, and her entire life was built around the belief that people like him were ruining the galaxy. So the two of them argued about it constantly. Each one poked at the foundation of what the other believed, and neither of them ever managed to knock the other over. Marda pushed her feelings down and told him to leave, partly because of everything she had been taught about the Jedi, and partly because she watched him use the Force in front of her, which in her world was the one thing you never do. She fell for him regardless, and in the middle of all that arguing, Kevmo told her about a place he had always wanted to see. He told her about Jedha, and about the convocation of the Force that sat there, where all sorts of Force religions had a voice, and the Jedi were only one seat among many. That conversation rearranged something in Marda's head. She already knew of Jedha as a moon full of priests, wanderers, witches, and Jedi, and she was especially interested in the Guardians of the Whills, since the man who founded her order had come from exactly that tradition. If Force religions were sitting in a room discussing how the Force should be treated, then in her mind, the path belonged in that room. Their message about freeing the Force needed to be spoken where the conversation was actually happening. She decided she wanted to be the one who spoke it, as the path's representative to the convocation. Kevmo mentioned that the groups there took in pilgrims, and Marda immediately thought of her cousin. Yana should come too. None of that plan survived what happened next. The jewel was not a jewel. It was an egg, and it hatched, and the mother gave the thing that came out of it a name. She called it the Leveler, and history would eventually call it the Great Leveler. What she had was a Nameless, a creature of a species called the Shriekerai, and the Nameless exist for one purpose. They hunt those who are sensitive to the Force. The one on Dalna moved on 4 legs and had claws, and it did something no weapon in the galaxy could do. It overwhelmed Force-sensitive beings and cut off their connection completely. Victims felt terror first, then nightmarish visions, and then they were drained away and left as calcified husks that looked more like stone than anything that had ever been alive. The creature also had no filter, and this is the part the path never accounted for. It did not check anyone's beliefs before it fed. Anyone sensitive to the Force was food, which included Path members who had never once used their abilities, and Path members who had gone their whole lives without knowing they had any. Zala Makri and Kevmo Zink were both lost to the newly hatched Leveler. Then the mother did the most dangerous thing she ever did, which had nothing to do with the creature itself. She stood in front of her followers and explained it. The Leveler, she said, was an agent of the Force. When it took someone who used the Force, it was carrying out the will of the Force itself. In a single speech, she turned a predator into a holy act, and her people believed her. Marda's response to losing Kevmo is the hinge the next 150 years swing on. She did not blame the mother who had brought the creature into their home. She blamed the Jedi. Her reasoning followed the doctrine she had been raised inside. Kevmo had been taken as a child and taught the wrong things by the Jedi Order, and they had shaped him into exactly the sort of person the Force needed to remove. What happened to him was the Force putting itself back into balance, and the Order had made it necessary. So she made a decision. She would bring down the Jedi Order, and she was certain the galaxy would be better for it. A grieving teenager, mourning a Jedi she loved, using a theology invented by a fraud, set out to destroy the institution he came from. With a living weapon in their possession and a rod capable of directing it, the Path stopped being a group that stayed home. Under the direction of its guide, and its guide was now Marda Rowe, the movement took to the stars aboard the Gaze Electric to widen its reach. And one of the places on that list was Jedha. Marda kept one thing from Dalna that she told nobody about. She took Kevmo Zink's lightsaber and hid it in her quarters beneath a neatly stacked pile of robes. The mother, meanwhile, was working the other end of her plan, gathering the rods together and running her private arrangement for the poison out of Eiram, using a war that had nothing to do with her to arm herself and to shift the blame onto the Order she despised. Line up where everybody stands as the Gaze Electric points itself toward Jedha. The Path has a flagship, a creature built to end Jedi, an artifact that can steer it, a radicalized teenage guide, a leader whose prophecy is a performance, a displaced former leader carrying a grudge, and a poison nobody knows still exists. The Republic has a fragile new peace between two exhausted worlds, a treaty waiting to be signed, and no awareness of any of it. The Jedi have two of their own gone, a master and her Padawan, and not the faintest idea what happened to them. The worst damage ever done to the reputation of the Jedi Order was not done with an army. It was done with a speech, a grievance that already existed, and one creature nobody in the crowd could see. The place it happened was the last place in the galaxy anyone would have picked for it. Jedha was the moon, where the different Force faiths actually managed to live beside each other, a destination people saved for years to visit, and the home of the newly formed Convocation of the Force. The Temple of the Kyber stood in Jedha City itself. Outside the walls of the Holy City stood an enormous statue of a Jedi known as the Final Protector, watching over the whole settlement. In front of the Convocation Chambers was an open plaza called the Square of the Supplicants, which is where people gathered when they had something to say. Keep that square and that statue in mind, because both of them matter before this is over. The first crack in Jedha showed up before the Path ever arrived. In 382 BBY, a delegate of the Yakom came to the Convocation Chambers to apply for membership. The Yakom were a Force cult with an uncomfortable history, once associated with the dark side, and they were unusual in that their members would only speak to outsiders through proxies. They had also changed. By this point, they had broken with the dark side entirely and taken a neutral position, which is exactly why they were applying. Two other representatives sitting in that chamber, one from the Falanasi and one from the Matukai, attacked them for it. Jedi Knight Olivia Zeveron stepped in to protect the Yakum delegate. The delegate withdrew, and their proxy left the chamber with a plain statement. They had come looking for a place of peace and harmony, and they had not found one. Nothing about that incident was the Path's doing. What the Path did was pick it up and sharpen it. Later, while working to tear down the Convocation's credibility, the Herald Worth Plouth told the people of Jedha that the Convocation had insulted and attacked the Yakum representative. That version leaves out who actually started it and who actually stopped it, which makes it a distortion instead of an invention. That distinction is the whole reason it worked. A lie with no truth in it gets challenged immediately because anyone who was in the room can knock it down. A lie built on something real is far harder to argue with because the people hearing it can check the outline of the story and find that the outline holds. The Path understood that better than anyone else operating in this era. The Convocation then made its own situation considerably worse. In that same year, it planned a festival in Jeddah City called the Festival of Balance, expecting it to pull in large numbers of visitors. On paper, it was a celebration of everything the body stood for. In practice, it landed as something else entirely, because the Festival of Balance was an attempt to take an observance the moon already had, the Season of Light, and rebrand it as the Convocation's own. The people of Jedha noticed. Sects that had been willing to give the new body a chance started pulling back. Tensions across the city went up instead of down, and the Convocation lost support among the very population it was supposed to be serving. They had overreached, and they had done it entirely on their own. The discontent on Jedha was homegrown. The Path found it lying there and put a flame to it. The Gaze Electric arrived in the Holy City, and the Path came ashore looking like exactly the sort of group Jedha welcomed. They purchased a healing house and began operating it, offering care to whoever needed it. Their public posture was charitable and peaceful, and their private posture was armed. The healing house was a front, and what it was fronting for would not become clear until much later when Jedi Master Silandra Sho put two sensations together in her memory. She had felt something deeply wrong at the Path's healing house. She felt the same thing during the riot. The creature had been sitting in that building the entire time, in the middle of a city full of people sensitive to the Force, being kept quiet until it was needed. Worth Plouth then set a plan in motion that he and Alicia Zeveron had worked out in advance. He stood before the Convocation of the Force and made 3 demands. He wanted the Path admitted as members. He wanted the Convocation to disband immediately, and he wanted every group seated there to stop using the Force altogether, which he presented as the only way to protect the sanctity of the Force itself. The chamber rejected him, which is precisely what he needed. There is an irony buried in this that the Path never acknowledged. Marda Rowe had wanted a seat at that table sincerely, and the mother had publicly disapproved of the whole idea. The Herald pursued it anyway, because a rejected application makes a much better story than an accepted one. More than a month after the Yakum delegate walked out, Plouth returned to the Convocation chambers and again demanded that the body dissolve itself. When he was finished inside, he walked out into the square of the supplicants, faced the crowd that had gathered, and started talking. He told them he had been thrown out for questioning the Convocation's authority and for holding beliefs that differed from theirs. He cast himself as one man asking liars to tell the truth. He said the Convocation existed only to push its own agenda, and that the agenda was putting the entire galaxy at risk. He said he had overheard a scheme inside that chamber to deceive the people of Jedha. Then he gave them the peace that turned a crowd into something else. He told them there had been another attack on the Temple of the Kyber. That last claim landed because it was accurate and because the Convocation had already handed him the weapon. After an earlier attack on the Temple of the Kyber, the body had met and decided not to tell the public what had really happened. They would announce it as a gas explosion instead. Their reasoning was not malicious, since they were trying to keep an anxious city from tipping into panic. The effect was catastrophic anyway. When the herald stood in the square and told the crowd that their leaders had hidden an attack from them, the crowd could check that claim against what they had been told, and the claim held up. Every accusation he had made before, it suddenly looked more credible. The anger in the square climbed with each sentence he spoke, and by the end of it, the people of Jedha believed a man from a cult over the council that governed their faiths. Then Plouth escalated in a way nobody in that square could have anticipated. He had Yana Ro release the leveler into the crowd, directing it with the Rod of Seasons. The creature did not need to touch anyone. Its presence rolled over every Force-sensitive being in that plaza, cutting them off from what they could feel and filling their heads with terror and visions that were not there. People who had come to listen to a speech started lashing out at whoever was closest. Jedi Master Salandra Sho was among those caught in it, which tells you the strength of what was moving through that square. State the mechanism plainly, because it is the whole design of this operation. The path did not require soldiers or ships or numbers. They required a rumor, a real grievance to hang it on, and a creature that makes the faithful turn on each other. Now consider what else was happening in Jedha City that same day. Following the ceasefire and the marriage that came out of it, representatives from Eiram and Erono had been invited to the Holy City by the Jedi and the Republic to put their names on a peace treaty. Jedha had been chosen deliberately for its reputation as a place where opposites managed to coexist, and the suggestion had come from Jedi Knight Gela Natai, who had wanted to see the moon for exactly that reason. Chancellor Orlan Mollo wanted to preside over the signing himself and was blocked from doing so by Republic security regulations. There was one detail hanging over the whole ceremony that nobody could ignore. Both worlds sent military ships along with their delegations. After everything Jiri and Fantu had done, after a wedding held on 2 planets, their governments still brought warships to a peace ceremony. The explanation offered was that war leaves a shadow behind it that stretches a very long way. The riot did not stay in the square. It spread through the streets until it reached the treaty signing, and the ceremony fell apart in front of everyone who had come to witness it. Eirami and Eroni forces went at each other openly in the middle of the Holy City, on top of the fighting that had already broken out between the sects. That is what the records call the Battle of Jedha, fought in 382 BBY on the Mid-Rim Moon, involving the warring factions of Eiram and Erono, several of the Force-worshipping sects living in the city, the Jedi Order, and forces of the Galactic Republic. During the fighting, the great statue outside the walls came down. The final protector, the figure that had stood watch over the Holy City, toppled while the city tore itself apart underneath it. If you want one image that says what this era is becoming, that is the one. Judged purely as an operation, Jedha worked exactly as designed. The path had engineered a situation where it appeared that the Jedi and the Republic, having announced they would bring peace to Eiram and Erono, had delivered nothing but more pain and suffering to everyone involved. That is what the galaxy saw, and the galaxy was not entirely wrong about the outcome, only about the cause. 2 institutions that had walked into that city blind absorbed the blame for something they had no idea was coming. The peace itself did not survive either, Word that the Jedha talks had collapsed spread quickly, and it was compounded by a discovery involving Clitobacter, a biological agent that traced back to the poison arrangement running quietly underneath all of this. Both planets returned to a state of war. A clash between starfighters from the two worlds then wrecked their ability to communicate with the rest of the galaxy, which isolated the entire system at the worst possible moment. The Mother handled the aftermath the way a professional would. The Convocation received a formal recorded apology from her for everything the Herald had done, delivered with appropriate regret, along with 1,000,000 zukels from her and the Path. She bought her way clear of suspicion, and the money worked. Worth Plouth was incarcerated for his part in it, which suited her arrangement perfectly, though he did not stay locked up forever and eventually escaped and made his way back to Dalna. Marda Rowe came out of Jedha carrying something heavier than a fine. She had used Kevmo Zink's lightsaber during the fighting, and afterward she hid it again in her quarters aboard the Gaze Electric. A member of a group that treats Force use as an abomination, fighting with a Jedi weapon she kept for sentimental reasons, is a contradiction she never resolves. Her reward for Jedha was to be pushed aside. The Mother shunned her afterward and stripped her of the title of guide, sending her back to looking after the littles. Then something started following her. Marda began to be haunted by a specter of Kevmo Zink, which was the Everini trait at work, and had nothing to do with the Force or with anything of him that survived. It mocked her and belittled her and kept at her until she needed somewhere to put everything it was stirring up, and that need is what pushes her past the point where she could still have turned around. The girl who once wanted a seat at a table where faiths talked to each other was now demoted, haunted, and looking for an outlet. While the Path regrouped, the Jedi finally started pulling on the thread. Jedi Master Char Rilroy and his Padawan Enya Keen traveled to the Eiram system on instructions from Yoda. Chancellor Orlen Molo briefed them on Eiram, and after hearing where things stood, the two of them decided to run their own investigation instead of working through official channels. They found allies in Shiri and Fantu, now married and desperate for the fighting to stop for good. Together they traveled to the moon Aeri to question two people who had been recovered from a crashed ship, Goy Ganok and Binot Ulo. The story those two gave did not hold together. Touring the way station with them, the Jedi started catching the gaps, and the truth began working its way to the surface. That thread has one end, and the end of it is a farming world called Dalna. The last thing the Path of the Open Hand ever did as one group was go home. The Gaze Electric carried them back to Dalna, to the compound they had held for a century, and the people living around it wanted nothing to do with them anymore. That should have been the end of the story right there, a spent cult with nowhere to land. The Mother solved it the way she solved everything, by using the ability she told her followers was an abomination. She spoke to the population of Dalna and shaped what they thought while she did it, and the pressure eased just enough for the Path to move back into their old buildings. Settling in was not the goal, though. She wanted more weapons to use against the Jedi, and she wanted them quickly, so she went back to the one man who had found her the first one. Sunshine Dobbs was hired to make the trip out to Planet X again and bring back more eggs. A Path team traveled to Sophros to collect them, and what they found there was worse than what they came for. Down beneath the surface lived beings called the Underdwellers. One member of the team, an Ovisian named Bokana Kos, was sensitive to the Force, and when he reached out toward those creatures, The Force gave him something back that nearly broke him. He came away with a vision so horrifying he could barely hold on to it, and he brought his warnings straight to Marda. The creatures were tied to a blight that was coming. What they wanted, as far as he could understand it, was the Force itself put in chains and eventually gone entirely, once whatever was coming had come. They wanted the Path to succeed on this mission, because the Path succeeding was what would let their blight begin. He described the way they wanted to spread across the lands of the galaxy, the way a sickness spreads through a field. The trip out cost the team badly. One of the underdwellers took a member named Gallimal, who did not survive it, and then followed the rest of them all the way to the surface. Waiting up there was something else. Another enormous being that the team came to think of as the Protector, and it moved to stop the Path from leaving with what they had taken. Bokanar Kos put himself between that creature and his own people. He held it off long enough for the others to reach their ship and get away with the eggs, and he did not come back with them. So a Force-sensitive man received a clear warning about an event that would nearly finish the galaxy, carried it back to his own leadership, and gave up everything he had to get them home so they could hear it. The Path ignored every word of it. Marda was in no position to act on warnings anyway. She had been shunned, stripped of her title, sent back to caring for the littles, and followed everywhere by a specter wearing the face of the boy she loved. Everything that had been building in her since Jedha came out at once. She got hold of the completed Rod of Power and used it to hatch the Nameless out of every egg the team had brought back. Yana tried to stop her, and Marda left her cousin without her hand. Then she gathered the militant members of the Path who were on Dalna and gave them a new name and a new shape. The open hand was closing into a fist, she told them, because a fist was what it would take to fight the Jedi, and the path of the closed fist would finish what the path of the open hand had started. Then she pointed them at the Jedi who had just arrived on their doorstep. What follows is remembered as the Night of Sorrow, and the records also list it as the Battle of Dalna. It happened in 382 BBY, and it started because the Jedi were doing exactly what they were supposed to do. Several separate groups of Jedi came to the Path compound to investigate what role this organization had played in the disaster on Jedha and in the war between Eiram and Erono. They came with questions. The Path treated their arrival as the excuse it had been waiting for and attacked. Once the fighting started, it grew faster than anyone could contain because reinforcements came in from every direction at once. More Jedi arrived, and Republic forces came in behind them. Fighters from Eiram and Erono arrived together. Two militaries that had spent 5 years pointed at each other, now standing side by side to help the Jedi. Dalnan citizens joined in as well, including the many who had wanted the Path gone from their world for a long time. Then Marda put the Nameless into the field, all of them, with the Leveler running at the head of the pack. What happened next was the same thing that had happened on Dalna once before, on a scale nobody had prepared for. The creatures made no distinction between one Force-sensitive being and another. They came for Jedi, and they came for members of the Path who had spent their entire lives refusing to use their abilities. And they came for members of the Path who had never even been told they had abilities at all. A great many Jedi were reduced to calcified husks where they stood. Others survived the encounter and lost themselves to the hallucinations, which was its own kind of ruin. Path members and Dalnan civilians were lost in numbers the planet had never seen. Jedi Master Comac Vitus came away from that field convinced the Jedi themselves were responsible for what happened there, and he carried that judgment with him for years afterward. Dalna itself never really recovered its old shape. The people who lived through that night rebuilt their culture into one that trains for battle constantly, generation after generation, so that nothing like it could ever catch them unready again. The person who ended it was the person who started it. Marda watched her own creatures take Path members apart without the slightest interest in what those people believed, and it horrified her. She had been taught that the Nameless carried out the will of the Force by taking those who misused it, and here they were, taking the faithful who had never touched it. The weapon did not care about her theology. So she used the Rod of Power to call the Leveler and its pack together into a single cavern and hold them there. Yanaro finished the job. She set off explosives that tore the area open to a flood, and the water took the creatures gathered inside it. Two cousins who had spent years on opposite sides of an argument ended up working together without ever fully reconciling to shut down the thing one of them had let loose. The battle ended in defeat for the Path, and what came afterward says a great deal about the galaxy this era produced. Two fleets came back to Dalna, one from Eiram and one from Erono, working as a single relief operation. They brought aid to the Jedi, to the people of Dalna, and to the surviving members of the Path, which is to say they helped the people who had just been fighting them. Forces from Jedha arrived to join the effort. Path members who came through the night were given whatever they needed to track down family or friends and start over. Aslin Rel, a Jedi Knight who had come out of that night in very bad shape, was taken to Coruscant for treatment, and the mother, Alicia Zeveron, the woman who had engineered nearly all of it from behind a false gift of prophecy, was taken into Jedi custody. She did not stay in it for long. Somewhere in the collapse of everything, Marda learned the truth about the person she had followed without question since she was a child. The visions were invented. The prophecy was a performance. The leader who preached that touching the Force was the worst thing a being could do had been using the Force herself the entire time, on her own followers, including Marda. So Marda handled it personally, using the one Nameless that had survived the flood. The creature took Alicia Zeveron the way it had taken everyone else, and left a husk behind. The woman who taught that Force use had to be answered by that creature was answered by that creature for using the Force at the hands of the most devoted follower she ever had. Both cousins came through the night alive, and neither of them came through it together. Marda kept one rod for herself. Yana quietly hid the other one from her, because whatever had held the two of them in the same room was gone, and they no longer agreed about the Jedi or about much of anything else. Marda took the Gaze Electric and the surviving Leveler and disappeared into empty space with a plan of her own, still intending to free the Force, working from a doctrine she now knew had been invented by a liar. Somewhere on the flight deck of that ship she took Bricol shell paint and put 3 marks on the wall. Those 3 marks are the beginning of an image the galaxy will learn to recognize with fear over the next 150 years. She moved herself into the throne hall of the ship and settled in there. The Path of the Open Hand was disbanded after the Night of Sorrow, and the pieces went in different directions. One group carried the old teachings forward as the Elders of the Path, and one of their later leaders, Tromac, had actually been one of the Littles on Dalna during the battle, a child who crossed paths with Grandmaster Yoda in the middle of all of it. The other group followed Marda, and that group becomes the Nihil. Members who had been away from the planet preaching, like the Osrolanso rocks, had no idea any of this had happened and kept operating as though the organization still existed. Then there is the version of events the Rowe family kept. In their private memory, Dalna and Jedha were proof that the Jedi were steering the galaxy toward ruin instead of balance. That grievance was built out of a lie an imposter told a teenager, and it gets handed down through 6 generations of one family like an heirloom. Which brings us to the single most consequential decision anyone makes in this entire era, and it belongs to the Jedi. Azlin Rel had come face to face with the Nameless 3 separate times during the Night of Sorrow, and it destroyed his mind. Before it took him completely, he wrote a journal setting down everything he had managed to learn about the creatures, which was more than anyone else in the Order knew. He handed that journal to his friend and fellow Jedi Arkoff, and then he walked away from the Jedi Order entirely. Rel fell to the dark side and spent the rest of his life studying the things that had broken him. Arkoff took the journal to the planet Banchai and hid it there, with his droid ZZ-10 standing guard over it. So the knowledge survived. It just went into a hole on a distant world instead of into the hands of the people who needed it. Then Grand Master Yoda and Master Creighton's son made the call. They decided the Nameless would be kept secret and kept out of the Jedi archives, on the reasoning that not knowing would protect the Order better than knowing would. Say it as plainly as it deserves. 150 years later, when the Nameless are turned loose on the Jedi again, the Order has no record whatsoever of what is coming apart around them. They cannot look it up because it was deliberately never written down. The greatest institution of learning in the galaxy is undone by a threat it erased from its own memory on purpose, and Yoda personally made that choice, and Yoda is still alive when the consequences arrive. Only one being keeps the connection intact. Azlin Rel goes on calling the Nihil by their old name, the Path, for the rest of his life, and almost nobody understands why. The galaxy that walked away from Dalna thought it had a happy ending. Eiram and Erono moved from an active war into a cold one, and their relationship then warmed up faster than anyone expected, because there is nothing like a shared disaster to make old enemies look at each other differently. Both worlds grew closer to the Republic, and eventually they agreed to let the Republic build a station in their territory, a station named Starlight Beacon. That decision pays off 150 years later, and nobody involved would have signed off on it if they could have seen how. Kyong Greylark stepped down as Chancellor after an ultimatum from her own son Axel and from the Mother, who had wanted to make use of her power. The Jedi, meanwhile, left Dalna believing they had won. They had put down a cult, buried what they learned, and completely misidentified who they had been fighting. What they had actually done was stand on a battlefield and watch the Nihil be born. From here, the story stops moving year by year and starts moving generation by generation, covering roughly 150 years with one family as the only thread through it. Around 381 BBY, about a year after taking the Gaze Electric for herself, Marda Rowe began searching for other Everini, since almost none were left anywhere. She started on Dantooine, questioning a human who claimed to have seen some, then followed his lead off-world. Around 379 BBY, the search was interrupted when she spotted a Jedi walking through a marketplace. She attacked him, left him badly hurt, and had him carried aboard her ship, where her crew now included Rox, the preacher who had been away when the path collapsed, along with Illyria and Milan Store. Rox and Stor hauled the Jedi down to the Great Leveler, and Marda shut off the containment shield herself. Her explanation afterward was that the man was still alive in there, and that he would come to regret it. She was also keeping a journal, and she was not writing it for herself. She recorded it for descendants who would not exist for decades, covering her life after leaving the path and everything her search turned up. One passage explains her better than anything anyone else ever said about her. She writes about wanting those unborn children to see what she is doing and approve of it, then about wishing she could cut out the last piece of herself that still longs to be told she has done well. That recording survives everything. It passes down to her granddaughter Shala Ro, who plays it for her own great-grandson Marchion Ro. By 252 BBY, he listens to all of it, decides it is useless rambling, and leaves it in a storage room. Marchion inherits a creature, a starship, and a grudge, and believes none of the theology underneath it, which is what makes him more dangerous than the woman who started it. The honest position on the years between is that the record is thin. Coverage of roughly 379 BBY through 260 BBY is sparse. What is established is that the splinter groups kept going, the elders of the path among them, and that the age of exploration wound down around 330 BBY. Marda's line continued through generations nobody named, down to Shala Ro, then her son Asgar Ro, then his son Marchion. There was never a founding moment with a speech and a flag. The group grew out of one woman's crew slowly, over generations, until what emerged had a name and a structure. The Nihil did not begin as an army. They began as a grieving teenager, a stolen ship, a caged creature, and a diary written for children who had not been born yet. Somewhere in those quiet decades, the family acquired what made everything afterward possible, and it was a person. They captured a hyperspace prospector named Mari Santeka and kept her alive inside a medical pod for close to 100 years. People who knew of her called her an oracle because her mind could plot routes through hyperspace that had no business existing. What she produced became known as the Paths, secret lanes that appear in no database and ignore the rules every other pilot follows. A ship fitted with path engines could reach almost anywhere, including through short jumps that let it appear and vanish before anyone could react. The Nihil themselves had no idea she existed. She was the private property of one family, hidden from the organization she powered, and that secret is the basis of the Eye's authority over everyone else. In 252 BBY, a young Martian Ro met her for the first time. She asked the boy where he would like to go, and he told her she could take them anywhere at all. His grandmother Shala watched and understood what she was looking at, because the boy's instinct was to befriend Mari Santeka so he could use her later. She had already decided her grandson would be the family's instrument of revenge. She ran the organization herself as the Eye of the Nihil, holding the position as the daughter of its founder. The phrase attached to her in the records is that she was a caretaker who united the storm, which captures both her strength and her limit. She pulled a scattered group into something coherent, kept Mari Santeka locked away, and moved slowly. She also predicted that Marchion would one day take on the Jedi and the Republic together, and she was right about that. Her caution is what finished her. Her son Asgar had spent his life waiting for the family to finally move, and by 252 BBY, he had run out of patience. The argument happened aboard the Gaze Electric. It escalated the way arguments do in that family, and he pushed her over a railing. She did not survive the fall. Asgar then took Marchion to no space, the region reachable only through the path engines, where the rest of the Nihil were based and where nobody hunting them could follow. One of their own leaders later described the group at that point as barely a breeze, which is a harsh thing to say about people named after a storm. They were a small gang. Members had been drifting away under Shala, and the two Tempest runners, Pan Eta the Dawutin and Kasav Miliko the Weekway from Sri Lur, were already thinking of leaving with their own crews. Asgar told them his mother was gone, and everything was about to change. Kasav's first instinct was to remove the remaining rows and take the Gaze Electric. What Asgar offered instead of an argument was a bet. He would put up everything he owned, ship included, against their belief that they could shoot his son out of the sky. Marchion would fly one fighter, and they could send as many as they wanted. They took the wager eagerly and threw scores of fighters at a boy in a single ship, and the boy won because his fighter could make short jumps. Nothing they flew could follow. Afterward, Asgar showed them the technology, and when Pan Eta asked how it worked, he told them it was a family secret he intended to hold over their heads. Asked whether he wanted to run the cruise, he turned it down because he preferred to rule from behind lieutenants. His promise to the room was that where his mother had been a caretaker who united the storm, he would bring the lightning. The structure he built matters because its flaws come due later. Asgar created the title of Eye of the Nihil for himself at the moment he handed the group access to the paths, and only a row could ever hold it. On the surface, the Eye was the head of everything. Underneath that, the Eye had almost no authority. The Eye could advise, could not give orders, and only got a real say when a vote came out tied, holding a double vote on anything involving the paths. The job was to protect the paths, find new ones, and hand them out. During celebrations in the Great Hall, the Eye stood on a platform set 1 meter lower than the one holding the Tempest runners. Below that sat the working machinery. 3 Tempest runners operated at any given time, each commanding a division called a Tempest, each planning their own raids, and each holding a vote. Below the runners came the storms, and below them the strikes and the clouds. The money ran on what Asgar called the Rule of 3, which split everything taken in a raid into thirds. 1/3 went to the crews who did the work, 1/3 to the Tempest runner who planned it, and 1/3 to Ro himself, provided the raid used his paths. He also built the Great Hall of the Nihil, a station at the center of no space. The Nihil saw themselves as riders of a storm sweeping the galaxy, entitled to take whatever caught their eye. People out on the frontier understood it in plainer terms. The Nihil took what they wanted and wrecked whatever they could not carry off. Stories went around about individuals who had survived running into them, and there were no stories at all about anyone driving them off. Kasav Miliko's division shows the scale involved, with roughly 1,000 members, hundreds of ships, and 3 storms named Delex, Gravan, and Wetbub. By around 247 BBY, the 3 runners were Panaita, Kasav Miliko, and a 3rd named Zanavan. Asgar called everyone to the Great Hall and accused Zanavan of running secret raids and pocketing the profits, which broke the Rule of 3 at its foundation. Zanavan denied all of it, threw an insult at young Marchion, broke out of his restraints, and went for Asgar. A storm named Lorna D, a Twi'lek, put him down before he got there, and Asgar promoted her to Tempest Runner on the spot to fill the seat she had just emptied. That day settled how people felt about him, and from then on, Asgar Ro was widely understood to be a tyrant, including by his own son. Roughly 10 years later, and the exact year is not firmly pinned down, the arrangement came apart. Pan Aita and Kasav Miliko wanted the Nihil back under their own authority and to stop handing over a third of everything for use of the paths. They brought Lorna D into a plan to remove Asgar and install his son as a puppet, since they saw Marchion as weak enough to manage and useful for keeping the paths flowing. D went to Asgar and told him about the plot, which looked like loyalty. He underestimated her completely. Angry at how he had used her, she went to the Great Hall alone, found him, and left him mortally wounded, and her fellow runners never learned it was her. Marchion found his father on the floor, asking him for help. He stood there and did nothing. After a lifetime of being threatened by the man, he watched it happen with satisfaction, then stayed above him for a full hour, deliberately fixing the scene in his memory. Then he picked up his father's helmet and walked out to meet Miliko and D, who acknowledged him as the new eye of the Nihil. What he inherited was the title, the Gaze Electric, the Path Engines, Mari San Tekka, and a family goal of revenge he had never personally felt. He suspected one of his Tempest runners had arranged his father's end, and he started working immediately to bring all three of them under his control. Underneath everything, Marchion Ro fought for himself, believing no government anywhere had the right to tell him what to do. He inherited a grudge and found it useful. While all of that consolidated in a region nobody could reach, the Republic was having the best years it would ever have. Supreme Chancellor Lina So led the government through this period, and she is the defining political figure of the age. Her signature initiative was a set of projects called the Great Works, built to connect the galaxy, and her line for all of it was that we are all the Republic. The Great Works on record include the Panacea, a Salvation-class medical frigate sent wherever crisis relief was needed, and the Republic Fair. What separates So from the chancellors who come after her is that her conviction was real. She wanted the galaxy to be just and comfortable for people at the farthest edge of the Outer Rim, and used the office to chase it. At the dedication of her largest project, she described a galaxy filled with great works, connected and peaceful, and said it would happen because of the people listening instead of because of her, in a republic where a voice from the farthest planet counted as much as a voice from the core. That project was Starlight Beacon, an enormous station built at tremendous cost and placed in the middle of the Outer Rim's dark zones. Its main job was to broadcast a signal travelers could navigate by, turning some of the most difficult space in the galaxy into something crossable. It was also a Jedi base of operations, a medical center with its own tower, a diplomatic hub, and a relief platform, and the whole structure could be towed to a world in crisis and parked there. By 232 BBY, the key figures aboard included Jedi Marshal Avar Kriss, Head of Operations Estala Maru, and Administrator Velko Jahen. Where they built it ties this entire story into a knot. Starlight Beacon went up in the territory of Eiram and Erono, and it went up there because those two worlds had grown close to the Republic after the Jedi helped pull them out of their war. The symbol of the greatest age the galaxy ever had was placed on the site of its proudest diplomatic success. Marchion looked at the same station and described something else entirely. He talked about the Republic planting itself in territory that was never theirs, arriving with their rules and their laws, and a version of freedom that costs plenty, with the Jedi always a step behind them, certain that everything they do is right and good. His family, he said, had learned what that certainty costs a long time ago. His grievance traces back to a lie an impostor told a teenager 150 years earlier, and he uses it anyway. The complaint underneath it is a different matter, because a government expanding into the frontier and calling it a gift was something plenty of people out there resented without any help from him. That is where the galaxy stands as it approaches 232 BBY, with a republic at the height of its confidence and a man in a hidden region who has waited his whole life. The woman who was flying the ship that ends the Golden Age had done everything right for 40 years. Her name was Jedha Kasset, and she had earned a career most pilots would envy before she ever took this job. She came out of the Malestar Sullust Joint Task Force, a regional military that protected a sector along the Mid-Rim border, and she served there with distinction before retiring. She started out in a single-seat Z-24 Buzzbug starfighter and worked her way up to commanding a heavy cruiser, one of the largest ships they had. The ship she captained now was called the Legacy Run, a Class A modular freight transport built by Canif Yards well over a century earlier and owned by the Bine Guild. Kasset ran it tightly and kept both the vessel and her crew in good condition. Aboard were thousands of colonists heading from the crowded core worlds out to the Outer Rim, chasing the same promise that had been pulling people outward for generations. Shortly before it happened, she checked her readouts and handed the bridge over to her second-in-command, Lieutenant Jerry Bowman, so she could take her evening walk through the ship. In one of the common areas, she ran into a young passenger named Serge Ukarien, who wanted to know when new holos were coming. She told him he had already worked his way through everything in the archives. Then she scolded him for trying to slice into the system to reach the titles he was too young to watch, and told him she knew about everything that happened aboard her ship. It is an ordinary exchange between a captain and a bored kid. Minutes later, there was nobody left aboard to have another one. The Legacy Run was traveling a well-mapped hyperspace route near the Hetzel system when it ran into a mass shadow, which is an obstruction where no obstruction should be. Kasset, still a starfighter pilot underneath everything, took manual control and tried to steer them clear of it. The ship was old and long past its prime, and the strain was more than the hull could hold. It lost structural integrity and tore itself apart around her. Her last action as captain was to seal the bulkhead doors on the passenger compartments, hoping it might spare some of the colonists behind them. Then the bridge was gone. She stayed at her post to the end, and she never learned what had actually been in front of her ship. What she hit was a Nihil storm ship traveling through hyperspace on a path. Later investigation confirmed it, and it confirmed something worse. The collision was arranged. Marchion sent that storm ship to intercept the Legacy Run and cause exactly the wreck it caused. And he chose his moment with care. The Jedi and the Republic were days away from unveiling their principal base in the Outer Rim, the proudest thing either institution had built in centuries. Everything the Rowe family had been carrying since a teenager painted 3 marks on a wall came due in that one collision. It was revenge, planned across generations, delivered by a man who did not believe in the reason for it. The wreckage did not stay in one place. Fragments of the Legacy Run were flung across the galaxy through hyperspace and came back into real space at close to the speed of light. The Hetzal system took the first and heaviest impact, which was catastrophic for reasons beyond the immediate damage. Hetzal was a major food producer for the entire Outer Rim, with billions living in the system and billions more depending on what it grew. Debris was on a collision course with every inhabited body in it. A rescue effort launched immediately, and many Jedi arrived aboard the starship at Araxia. Avar Kriss led the Jedi response and came out of it known across the galaxy as the hero of Hetzal. The way she did it is one of the most distinctive abilities anyone displays in this era. Kriss could create a network in the Force, connecting Jedi across an entire star system and even across the galaxy, letting them act as a single mind. The moment that earned her the title involved one particular fragment. A giant tank of liquid Tibanna was on course to strike Hetzal's largest star, and if it had connected, the reaction would have taken the whole system with it. Kriss opened her network, linked every Jedi she could reach across that system, and together they moved the tank off its path. Losses were still enormous, even with the system itself saved. The Republic ran the response on the ground through Chancellor So's administration, and among the people working the problem was a young Sulistan technician named Kevin Tarr, who built the array that would later calculate where the next fragments would appear. Because they kept appearing, pieces of the Legacy Run continued dropping out of hyperspace across the Outer Rim, seemingly at random, over a long stretch of time, and the galaxy gave these events a name. They were called emergences. The first came in the Abdalis system, where 7 pieces arrived at once. 6 of them passed through without touching anything. The 7th struck Abdalis, destroyed a city, and roughly 20 million people were lost. In the aftermath, Lawrence Garello of Garello Technologies evacuated his employees and his research off the planet, and the Nihil attacked his convoy before it could clear the system. Eriadu got the worst of it. A fragment entered the Eriadu system without slowing and struck the moon, and 1.2 billion people living there were lost. Governor Muralveen got Kasav Miliko on a transmission and made him listen. She promised him that the people of Eriadu were hunters, that the Nihil had just become their prey, and that they would be coming. Kasav cut the transmission and left. That conversation is the reason Eriadu shows up with a fleet at the battle that follows. And it is also the reason Eriadu matters enormously at the very end of this era. Elsewhere, the pattern repeated. Several moons in the Trimont system were destroyed, Corbital among them, and Trimont 4 produced 2 refugees who become important, Zine Mrala and Krix Kamarat. One emergence in the Wasta region produced a smaller story worth telling because it shows what the crisis did to people. 2 Hassarians were badly injured and brought to the med center aboard Starlight beacon for treatment. While they were recovering, Ambassador Cyril of the Skembo, whose people had been rivals of the Hessarians for a long time, tried to frame them for an assassination attempt using stolen hair and DNA. Administrator Velko Jahin worked out what had happened and exposed it. The shattered moon above Kobo was destroyed by an emergence as well. Across all of them, entire civilizations were wiped off the map, and the totals run into the billions. Chancellor Lina responded by closing hyperspace routes across the Outer Rim, shutting down travel through whole regions to keep people from flying into the next one. Those closures were the actual objective. With the lanes shut and the Republic tied in knots, the only people who could still move freely through the Outer Rim were the ones with path engines, which meant the Nihil had an entire region to themselves. Marchion Ro had also worked out how to predict where the next emergence would surface. He fed that advantage to his Tempest runners as an extortion scheme, having them blackmail worlds that were about to be struck, offering to stop the debris in exchange for payment. Greed broke it open. The runners started fighting each other over the take, and one of them exposed his own presence during a blackmail attempt that failed. Republic and Jedi fighters confronted the Nihil in open space, and that is the moment the galaxy learns these people are more than a rumor. Ro then restricted use of the paths until the attention faded, and every runner accepted it except Lorna D, who talked him into granting her one path for a quick raid on a world called Elfrona. D said she wanted to take the Blythe family of Alderaan and ransom them back to their wealthy relatives. Ro wanted something else entirely, and the whole raid was bait. He wanted Jedi to come running so he could capture one. The Jedi stationed at the Elfrona outpost obliged, with Master Loden Greatstorm, his Padawan Bel Zettifar, and Master Porter Engel responding. They disabled the mines waiting for them and chased the kidnappers, pulling the Blythes back one at a time until only Otto Blythe was still held. Loden Greatstorm boarded the Nihil ship to get him, breaking his leg during the attempt. Lorna D arrived and took both of them and delivered them to Ro. Ro explained what he had actually been fishing for, and Otto Blythe did not leave that ship alive. Loden Greatstorm became a prisoner aboard the Gaze Electric, and the Jedi who had come with him, Bel Zettifar included, believed he was gone. How Ro handled him says everything about the man. He had Pan-Aita seize 7 innocent passengers off a transport bound for Travnin and hold them aboard the ship, then had them hurt with electricity, not for information and not for pleasure, but because Greatstorm would feel their pain through the Force and be unable to gather himself enough to use it. Ro privately acknowledged that those 7 had done nothing to deserve any of it. Then he dismissed the thought with the observation that life was never fair to anyone. He is not cruel because a doctrine tells him to be. He is cruel because it works. Other pieces were moving in the same window. Kriss Kamarat, one of the refugees out of Trimont 4, joined the Nihil and became Marchion Ro's protege while Ro was searching for the Great Leveler. His friend Zine Mrala went the opposite direction and was taken in by the Padawans of the Starhopper, welcomed into their group even though she was not a Padawan herself. The Republic starship Steady Wing was struck by Nihil saboteurs working undercover, which left everyone aboard stranded on the jungle moon Weevo. One of those saboteurs, Clinith Da, had been hoping the job would earn her a promotion and a direct line to Kasaf Miliko. She could not have known what her own leader had already decided about Kassav. The Republic and the Jedi took the fight to the Kur Nebula, a bright green cloud out in the outer rim. Kevin Tar's array had traced the origin point of the vessel that caused the great disaster to somewhere in that region. Chancellor So empowered Admiral Kronara to activate the defense provisions of the Republic Defense Coalition, with instructions to do whatever it took to stop the Nihil and bring every last one of them to justice. The Jedi Council then had an argument that sits at the center of this entire era. Master Adampo said the Order should stay out of it because this was a military action and the Jedi were not a military force. Master Oppo Rancisis pointed out that the Jedi had acted as one before, in conflicts like the Great Sith War. Master Rana Kant answered that those were wars, and that they were not currently at war. They were, and they had been for months, and none of them knew it yet. It was the first military action the Jedi had taken in generations. Fighting alongside the Republic and the Order was a flotilla from Eriadu, there to answer for their moon. What none of them understood was that Marchion Ro had arranged this battle too. He sent Kassav Miliko and his entire Tempest into it, knowing they would be destroyed, because losing them would convince the galaxy it had seen the whole of the Nihil. And Kassav's Tempest was only a third of what Ro actually had. He also sabotaged the path engines on Kassav's ships, so that Tempest was undone by its own drives nearly as much as by enemy fire. In the final phase, Governor Murl Veen boarded Kassav's flagship, the New Elite, and kept the promise she had made over that transmission. The Jedi paid as well. Master Jorah Mali, who commanded the Jedi contingent, was lost in the fighting, and the Trandoshan Master Skier lost an arm and came out of it changed in ways that worried Avar Kriss and his recently promoted former Padawan, Keeve Trennis. Then came the lie that wins Marchion Ro the entire war. The Republic believed it had destroyed the Nihil, and the hyperspace lanes across the outer rim were reopened. Ro told the surviving Nihil a very different story about how Kassav had been lost, presenting him and his people as martyrs who gave everything for the cause. He used that sacrifice to pull every remaining Tempest under his sole command, promising to expand their operations across the galaxy and to protect their way of life from the Republic and the Jedi. The Eye of the Nihil had been an advisor with a tie-breaking vote and a platform set lower than everyone else's. It was now a dictatorship. The Tempest Runner role survived, with Zetar the Talpini eventually taking Kassav's seat, but every runner now answered to Ro. The Jedi, meanwhile, had no idea Marchion Ro existed and believed Lorna D was the Eye of the Nihil, and they went on believing it for years. With the enemy apparently finished, the dedication of Starlight Beacon went ahead and the station opened to the galaxy. The Jedi Order and the Republic hosted a conclave aboard to mark the occasion, and Chancellor Lina So gave the address she is remembered for, the one built around the idea that all of us together are the Republic. She meant every word of it, and so did the people applauding her. Nobody in that room was pretending, and nobody in that room had the information that would have changed the mood. The high point of the Golden Age is a celebration held on the strength of a belief that was already false, aboard a station that has less than 2 years left. Not every threat in this story was planned by somebody. One of them had been asleep since before the Republic existed, and the people who woke it up had no idea they were doing it. When the Great Disaster forced ships out of hyperspace all over the frontier, a number of travelers ended up stranded at the Amaxine space station out on the galactic frontier, with nowhere else to go. Among them was a group of Jedi traveling aboard a ship called the Vessel. That group included Padawan Reith Silas, Master Comac Vitus, Master Orla Jarini, who was a Wayseeker, and Master Nib Asek, with her Wookiee Padawan Buriaga Agaburi. They were on that station for the most ordinary reason there is, which is that they had nowhere better to be. The Amaxine station sat well outside the reach of the Republic, in the part of space where nobody checks on anything, which is exactly the sort of place where something can be left alone for a very long time. While they were there, they found something old, and they let it out without understanding what they had done. The Drengir are an ancient species, and describing them takes a moment because there is nothing else quite like them. They are amorphous, sentient, and carnivorous, and they are closer to plants than to anything with a spine. They function through a hive mind, all of them connected, all of them led by a central figure called the Great Progenitor. Anything made of flesh registers to them as food, and they are pulled toward the Force the way a root is pulled toward water. What makes them genuinely unsettling is how little there is to talk to. There is no cause here, no grievance, no set of demands anyone could meet or refuse. There is hunger, and there is the urge to spread, and that is the entire personality of the species. They had been dormant for an extremely long time before a handful of stranded travelers wandered into the wrong part of a space station. Both the Jedi and the Nihil ended up fighting them aboard the Amaxine station, which tells you how quickly the situation escalated. The Jedi solution was drastic and effective because they decompressed the entire station and pulled the Drengir out into open space. Walking away from that, they believed they had seen the end of it. They were wrong in a way that spread across an entire region. Whatever happened on the Amaxine station reached through that hive mind and woke sleeping Drengir all over the outer rim and hut space, turning one bad afternoon into a galactic crisis. That is the trouble with fighting something that shares one mind between all of its bodies, because what happens to a few of them does not stay with a few of them. There was even a separate arrival at Starlight Beacon, where a Drengir came aboard hidden inside the remains of a hut trader and attacked the station once it stirred. The proudest achievement of the Republic had a monster smuggled into it inside a body, and nobody noticed until it moved. The Jedi of Starlight Beacon were sent out across a long list of worlds to hold the line and get people clear. One of those missions took them to the Hutt world Sedri Minor, where they came face to face with the Hutt leader Miaga Angeliak Atirue. And what came out of that meeting is one of the strangest arrangements in galactic history. The Jedi Order and the Hutt Cartel formed an alliance. The Hutts had every reason to agree, since their own homeworld of Nalhuta had been ravaged by the Drengir, along with a long list of planets across Hutt space. Sit with that pairing for a second. The most idealistic institution in the galaxy, at the absolute height of its influence, formally shaking hands with its most notorious criminal syndicate. Neither side pretended to like it. They did it because something with no interest in either of their philosophies was eating its way through their territory. Jedi Knight Keeve Trennis is the one who found the way to end it. She reached into the Drengir hive mind directly, which is an extraordinary thing to attempt, and through that connection she located the Great Progenitor on a wild space planet called Mulita. What followed is remembered as the assault on Mulita. Jedi came in from Starlight Beacon, and from postings scattered across the Outer Rim, joined by Hutt clan forces, and they threw everything they had at the place. The assault did what it was meant to do. The great progenitor was captured and sealed inside a stasis field, and with the head of the hive mind contained, the crisis lost the thing driving it. Reaching into a mind that considers you food is not a small risk to take, and Trennis took it in the middle of a war she had already been injured by. The Alliance survived exactly as long as the fighting did. Once the progenitor was in a field and helpless, the Jedi and the Hutts discovered they disagreed about what should happen next, and the disagreement was not a small one. The Hutts wanted it finished permanently, and they could not understand why anyone would hesitate. The Jedi refused to end the life of a captive who could no longer fight back, because that is a line the Order does not cross regardless of what the captive is. Keeve Trennis watched the argument and observed that their partnership looked like it had reached its end. There is no version of this where either side talks the other around, since the Hutts were being practical and the Jedi were being Jedi. Both sides had just saved a significant portion of the galaxy together. Neither side could stand the other's reasoning for 5 minutes afterward. None of them knew the most important thing about the crisis they were fighting. The Nihil had helped seed the Drengir across the Outer Rim deliberately, and the entire purpose was to give the Jedi something enormous to be busy with. That is worth stating carefully, because the Drengir crisis was real and it was terrible on its own terms, credited with thousands of lives lost across the worlds it touched. The Nihil did not invent the threat. They found it, spread it, and let the Jedi Order do what the Jedi Order always does, which is run toward the emergency. It is the cheapest possible way to fight an opponent, because the Jedi supplied all of the effort themselves and paid for it in lives. The plan worked perfectly. At the moment the Nihil struck the Republic Fair on Valo, most of the Jedi based at Starlight Beacon, Marshal Avar Kriss among them, were somewhere else entirely with their hands full of carnivorous plants. The timing is almost too neat to be real. The Drengir arc ends with the great progenitor defeated on Mulita, and Kriss and her Jedi come out of that victory to the news of what happened on Valo. So the win and the catastrophe reached them in the same breath. While the Order was chasing that crisis around the frontier, the Nihil used the room they had bought themselves. Raiding continued throughout, with recorded targets including Cilicia and the star cruiser Halcyon. More importantly, they went looking for a permanent home, somewhere that could function as both a sanctuary and a fortress. Zetar, who had taken the Tempest Runner seat left open after Kassav was lost, located a prison complex on a world called Grizal, and that complex became the Nihil stronghold. A prison is a fitting choice for them, and it becomes very relevant to a Jedi who is currently being held aboard the Gaze Electric, since a group with a fortress full of cells has room for more than one captive. The organization that had been a scattered gang a generation earlier now had a fortress, a fleet, a hidden region, and a leader nobody outside their own ranks could name. Everything they needed for the largest operation in their history was assembled, while the people who might have stopped them were on the far side of the frontier, pulling civilians out of the reach of something with roots. Marchion Rose spent this same window collecting the piece he actually cared about. He traveled to the Ristan Badlands and went down into the caves of Ristan, to a shrine where an ancient creature had been held in ice, under the watch of droid attendants, and he set it free. The Great Leveler was back in the hands of the family that had first taken it out of the ground. There is a detail underneath this that reframes the whole Ro family. The Leveler had been revered by Marchion's ancestors for generations, and none of them ever knew that the name they used was not its true name. They did not worship it as a god either. They honored it as an agent of balance, which is the exact theology a grieving teenager had built on Dalna 150 years earlier, carried forward intact by people who never questioned where it came from. Ro himself believed the creature would bring about the doom of the Jedi, and he turned out to be largely correct about that. What he had was a weapon designed by nobody, aimed at the one group in the galaxy that could not be told about it. Because the record of what it does had been buried on purpose. He also finished cleaning up his own house. Pan-Aita and others had been resisting the way he was consolidating power, since none of them had signed up to take orders from an eye. The problem for Aita was the mood in the ranks, because the Nihil had been worked into a frenzy over the story of Kassav and his Tempest giving everything for the cause. Standing against Ro now meant standing against a martyr, and Aita had no realistic choice but to fall in line behind him. Around the same time, the Nihil tried to raid Cyclor, where a research vessel called the Innovator was under construction for the upcoming Republic Fair. Jedi Master Indira Stokes repelled them, and the raid failed. That was a clear warning, delivered in advance, about exactly what the Nihil intended to do to the fair. The Republic looked at a failed raid and saw a failed raid, and went on preparing the largest public gathering the galaxy had seen in generations. The way Ro described the coming attack to his own people explains why they picked the target they picked. He talked about the Republic Fair as the spectacle to end all spectacles, with millions of Lina So's supporters arriving from every system in the galaxy to walk beneath her colors. The Nihil had not been invited, he said, and the Nihil would be there anyway. What he identified as the real enemy was not a fleet or a garrison. It was the symbol itself, the living proof that the Republic could bring people together and make them feel hopeful and safe, and his rallying cry pointed directly at the Chancellor who built it. Understand what that means strategically. They were not going after a military target at all. They were going after the idea that the Republic works in front of the largest audience anyone could assemble. That choice is why Valo becomes the hinge of the entire era, instead of one more raid on a list. Two other threads are worth setting down before that day arrives. The first is a scientist named Chansey Yarrow, whose work lands slightly later but starts here. Following Valo, the Graf family partnered with the Nihil, working specifically with Lorna D to develop hyperspace technology. What the Nihil offered Yarrow was access to Mari Santeka, which meant access to the one mind in the galaxy that could make her lifelong project possible. She wanted to build a gravity well projector, and with that access, she built it. The result was a station called the Gravity's Heart in the Berenje sector, capable of reaching out and pulling starships out of hyperspace from anywhere in the galaxy and dragging them back to the sector. And it did exactly that on several occasions. A group of Jedi eventually found it, and the Republic Defense Coalition destroyed it, after which Yarrow went to work for the Grafs. Hold on to her name. Her research becomes the Storm Seeds, and she personally becomes the most heartbreaking figure in the fall of Starlight Beacon. The second thread is quieter, and it belongs to Elzar Mann. Ty Yorick, a former Jedi Padawan who left the Order and now hunts monsters for a living, was moving independently through this period and drifting toward Valo without any idea why it mattered. Mann was having a harder time. His visions had been getting worse for a while, and they were not the sort of thing anyone could act on. He saw Jedi running from something through thick fog. He saw Avar Kriss. He saw Stellan Gios. He saw a Tholothian he could not place, and sounds he could not shake off afterward, and none of it came with a location attached. So he demanded one, pressing the Force for the only piece of information that would let him do something useful. When he woke up, he understood that the answer had been sitting there the entire time in a single word, and the word was Valo. The Republic Fair existed to make a point, and the point was that the galaxy had gotten back up. It was held on the outer rim world of Valo in 231 BBY, the first fair of its kind in a generation. Chancellor Lina wanted the galaxy to see with its own eyes that the Republic had recovered from the great disaster and from the year of emergences that followed it. Think of it as a world's fair scaled up to an entire civilization, with representatives and showpieces arriving from every corner of Republic space. Lonisa City, the capital of Valo, was rebuilt for the occasion, with a brand new spaceport and renovations running through the whole city. The honored guest was Elzar Yovet, the Ragasa of the Togruta, whose people the Republic was hoping to welcome into membership. Coordinator Samara Raoun directed the planning. Everything about it was designed to be looked at. Security came up beforehand, and the way that conversation went is worth walking through. Senator Vadu asked whether the innovator had adequate protection. Master Stellan Gios noted that 2 Jedi were assigned to it. Gios also reported that Nihil attacks had been decreasing, which was accurate at the time, and which reads very differently now. An argument broke out in the Senate over whether the fair was safe to hold at all, and Chancellor shut down Senator Noor's objections and placed her confidence in the Jedi and the organizers. She also pointed out on the record that Jedi Master Elzar Mann was stationed on Valo to oversee security personally. None of these people were being careless. Every one of them was reasoning from the information they had. And the information they had was exactly what Marchion wanted them to have. The fair itself was built around 3 showpieces. The Unity Arc was the centerpiece of the opening ceremony, 22 floating globes representing the core founders of the Galactic Republic, Alderaan among them. The Innovator was a research vessel built by the Cyclorians for the Republic and presented as a symbol of what progress looked like. The world pavilions were sky islands, each one representing a different planet of the Republic, floating above the crowds. Every piece of that display was chosen to communicate the same idea in a different way, which is that all of these worlds belong to one thing, and the one thing is working. It is a very effective message. It also gave an enemy a shopping list. The Nihil attacked the day after the fair opened. They had spent most of the time since the Battle of Kur regrouping and rebuilding, which the Republic had read as decline. All 3 Tempest runners led the assault together: Lorna D, Pan Aita, and Zetar, which is the entire senior leadership of the organization committing to one target at once. Their first move was the smart one. They disabled communications across the planet so that no call for help could leave Valo. Every Jedi and every Republic ship that might have responded had no idea anything was happening. A celebration attended by people from across the galaxy was cut off from the galaxy in a matter of minutes. Then they went through the list. The Unity Arc was destroyed. The Innovator was scuttled and dropped into Lake Lonisa. A war cloud of poisonous gas was spread across the entire fair, and the sky islands of the world pavilions came down. Hundreds of thousands of people were lost on Valo. Lorna D personally hunted Chancellor So through the chaos, and So was badly injured before she got clear, though she survived it. Nothing about the target selection was random, since each thing they broke had been built specifically to make people feel that the Republic could protect them. What kept the day from being total is a short list of individuals. Padawan Bel Zettifar pulled a great many civilians out of the falling innovator, and one of the people he saved was Kitrep So, the Chancellor's own son. Tai Yorick, the former Jedi Padawan who now hunted monsters for a living, fought alongside Elzar Mann in the streets of Lonisa City, which is remarkable given that the Jedi had arrested her shortly beforehand after catching her and a buyer testing machinery capable of shutting down electronics, including a lightsaber blade. Padawan Ram Jomaram got communications working again, and that single act is the reason help could be called at all. Once the signal went out, Jedi, Republic forces, and the Togruta military combined to push the Nihil off the planet. Many of them still escaped, Pan Eta's Tempest included. The records call the day the Valo Atrocity, and the name has stuck ever since. Pan Eta did not stop to celebrate. His Tempest went straight on to attack the Cyclor shipyards, intending to take another piece out of Republic power and prestige while everyone was reeling. This time the Republic and the Jedi were ready for him, and the response at what becomes the second Battle of Cyclor took his Tempest apart almost completely. Eta himself survived the fighting. What he did not survive intact was his own leader, because Marchion Row poisoned him that same year. Eta ended up on Port Yonder in the Pelgrin sector, seeking out an unhygienic medic who fitted him with a ventilator to keep him breathing. One of the three most powerful commanders in the organization was reduced to a man on a back world, paying someone questionable to keep his lungs working. Rowe did not need an enemy to do that to him. The Jedi found the Nihil base the old-fashioned way. They put stowaways aboard a Nihil ship and had them activate a homing beacon once they arrived, which pointed straight at Grizal. Master Stellan Gios and his red group broke off from the fighting at Cyclor and went in. During that assault, Bel Zettifar found the last thing he expected to find in a Nihil stronghold, because Loden Greatstorm was alive. His master had been a prisoner this entire time. For the full year Bel had spent believing he was gone. They had minutes together. Then Marchion Row released the Great Leveler. Loden Greatstorm was turned into a calcified husk in front of his Padawan. Bel Zettifar had spent a year grieving a man who was not gone, got him back for the length of a conversation, and then watched something without a name undo him in a way nobody present could explain. That is the first appearance of the Nameless in this war, and the most important fact about it is what did not happen next. Nobody identified the creature. Nobody looked it up. The Order had deliberately erased every record of these things from its own archives 150 years earlier, so the Jedi standing in that room had nothing to compare it to and no vocabulary for what they had seen. Rowe also tested the creature on Zeiss during this period, which put the Force-sensitive Bond twins Tarek and Saret in the hospital. And when the Jedi walked out of Grizal, they were more certain than ever that Lorna D, who escaped again, was the leader of the Nihil. The Republic answered Valo with Operation Counter-Strike, a campaign built to wipe the Nihil out entirely. It was prosecuted by the Unified Republic Task Force, a joint Jedi and Republic body, and the engagement list is long. Karlak was a Republic victory, with several pirates captured and imprisoned aboard Starlight Beacon. Aris and Port Haven were both major wins for the task force, and fighting also reached Golrath, Magaveen, and the Drayton Nebula. At the Battle of Galactic, the Nihil tried to take relay post Epsilon 1, and the Jedi and the Republic won the engagement, though the Nihil managed to destroy the station anyway, and the Republic came away wrongly convinced that Lorna D had been finished there. Stellan Gios summed up the campaign in a status report by saying the Nihil were running scared. On its own terms, he was right, because Counter-Strike genuinely worked and left the Nihil fractured and scattered across the frontier. One measure of the damage is that Tempest runner Cara Sue's entire Tempest was reduced to the people standing on her own ship, the Poisoned Barb. The Jedi of Starlight Beacon then tried something the Council had specifically not approved. They infiltrated the Nihil, sending Keeve, Trennis, and Tarek in undercover to work from the inside. The operation ended on Zeiss, and it ended badly. Miaga the Hutt, their former ally from the Drengir crisis, had been captured by the Nihil, and she gave up their identities. Trennis and Tarek tried to run and were cut off by Lorna D, who was not finished at Galactic after all, and who used the Great Leveler against them. Jedi aboard the Ataraxia reached them in time and got both of them out. D escaped one more time, which by this point was becoming a pattern nobody wanted to name out loud. Elsewhere, the fighting kept branching. The Jedi defended Takodana against a Nihil attack and won it, but not before the Nihil destroyed the Jedi temple standing there. That attack was carried out by a cell led by Kriss Kamarat, the refugee from Trimont 4 who had grown into Marchion Ro's protege, and Starlight's Jedi had been hunting that cell for a while. They traced its headquarters to Dolhar Hyde. Republic and Jedi forces fought the cell in the air over the planet, and then a second Jedi group landed and ran a ground assault that ended with Kriss Kamarat in custody. A boy who lost his home to the Great Disaster and blamed the Republic for it was taken into Republic custody for helping to destroy a temple. The Order kept losing places that year as well as people, and a temple on Takodana is the sort of loss that does not show up in a casualty figure. It was one of the outposts that made the Jedi a presence in the galaxy rather than a council on Coruscant. Then came Dalna, and what happened there deserves your full attention. Cara Zu began taking children off the planet with the intention of rebuilding Nihil numbers by raising a generation of true believers who would be passionate about the cause in a way that hired raiders never are. Jedi stationed on Dalna caught what she was doing, and Jedi Knight Venestra Ro helped shut it down. The Nihil scientist Zadina Makampa answered that by activating a crystalline power matrix tied into Dalna's crust, which set off the planet's volcanic systems and produced groundquakes and eruptions capable of ruining the entire world. Cara Su attacked the Dalnan capital of Saludad at the same time. There is a cold logic to what Zu was attempting with those children, since raiders can be paid off or scared off, while people raised inside a belief cannot. Her leader had come from exactly that kind of upbringing, and he was proof of how well it holds. So the Republic did the only thing that could work at that scale, and the scale of it is genuinely staggering. They towed Starlight Beacon to Dalna. The station was physically moved across space, pulled primarily by the MPO 1400 Purgil-class star cruiser Halcyon, with help from other vessels, so that the entire population of a planet could be evacuated aboard it. Jedi Padawan Imri Kantaros organized the effort. It worked, and most of the people of Dalna were saved. Now sit with where that happened. Dalna is the world where the Path of the Open Hand was founded, the compound where a creature was first hatched, the ground where the Nihil came into being. The greatest achievement of the Galactic Republic was hauled across the stars to rescue the descendants of the people who started the movement that is going to destroy it. Neither side had the slightest idea. Starlight was towed once more not long after. The planet Eiram was struck by a catastrophic cyclone that swallowed nearly an entire hemisphere and damaged the desalination plants that supplied the population with all of its fresh water. The station was brought into orbit around Eiram to provide supplies, repairs, and help with rebuilding, which is precisely the job it had been designed to do. Remember where it is parked, because that detail matters enormously very soon. Starlight Beacon is above Eiram, doing relief work, exactly as advertised. At the moment, everything goes wrong. The Republic's proudest structure ends up in the sky over one of the two worlds whose peace made the whole era look possible. The ability to move the station was treated as one of its great strengths. And it was, because a hospital that can come to you is worth more than one you have to reach. Nobody had spent much time considering what it means to park your most valuable asset directly above a populated planet. Meanwhile, Avar Kriss decided to finish the war herself. With the Nihil scattered, she gathered a team to hunt down Lorna D, whom the Jedi still believed to be the Eye of the Nihil. Stellan Gios reminded her that the Council had recommended prudence, and Kriss went anyway. Her team was Keeve Trennis, Skier, Orbalin, Gunral Monshi, and Nuran Bakarakana. Kriss had spent the Drengir crisis away from Valo and had come back to find out what happened while she was gone, and something in her had been running hot ever since. Using a Nihil Path engine recovered from the fighting at Grizal, they took the Ataraxia into no space and arrived at the Great Hall of the Nihil, the heart of the entire organization. Then they opened fire on it without warning or provocation, which the record notes as distinctly unusual behavior for Jedi, and boarded in the confusion. Inside, Kriss turned Tempest Runner Zetar's own flamethrower back on him, and that was the end of him. Lorna D, out of options, ordered the Nihil storm ships to fire on their own Great Hall, which forced the Jedi to stop fighting and start saving people, including a great many Nihil, from being pulled out into open space. Then Kriss found D. She went after her in a rage, beat her in lightsaber combat, and stood over a defeated and defenseless opponent, and Keeve Trennis had to talk her out of what she was about to do. That moment is a real crack in Avar Kriss, and it does not close. Kriss took D prisoner instead and detained her aboard the Ataraxia, intending to deliver her to Starlight Beacon. Her Jedi flew out of no space, believing they had just ended the Nihil. It was the third time they had believed that, and they were wrong again. Months before anything happened at Starlight Beacon, Marchion went back to the place his family found the first one. Around 230 BY, he took a group of Nihil personally devoted to him, called the Shayar, on a mission to Sophros to bring back as many of the Nameless as he could carry. Getting to that planet is the hard part, because it is wrapped in a violent outer layer that tears apart anything trying to pass through, and Ro knew about it from knowledge handed down through generations of his own family. His solution says everything about him. He sent wave after wave of Nihil strike ships and their scout pilots into that layer, which he called the Veil, purely so it would be busy with them. While the Veil was occupied with his own people, Ro and the She'ar slipped through it aboard the cloud ship Ikaru. He spent the lives of his followers as a distraction and did not appear to think twice about it. On the surface, he activated the Rod of Seasons and called the Nameless to him. The planet did not care for that at all. Ro and the She'ar were attacked by the creatures and the growth around them from every direction, because on that world essentially everything is alive and nothing is neutral. He got out anyway, carrying both grown Nameless and a supply of eggs. And he still had a few of those eggs left, as late as 228 BBY. One creature hatched from that batch eventually turned up in private hands, a Nameless called Grendrek kept by a teenage Umbaran scientist named Niv Drendo Apruk. Somebody was keeping one as a specimen, while the galaxy had no idea the species existed. That is how completely the record had been buried, since the only people who understood what these things were happened to be the ones using them. Next, he softened the target, and the method was aimed at people instead of defenses. Ro ran a series of attacks from the air on Aline, Yexom, Japial, and Tais Brabo. The strikes produced exactly what they were meant to produce, which was a refugee crisis, with civilians fleeing toward Starlight Beacon and toward Jedi temples across the region. That flow of frightened people was the actual objective. Then the Nihil attacked the temples those refugees had run to, including the Chespia temple, where Imgri and Imgri's Padawan were lost, and they did it specifically so the message would be understood. By the time he was finished, the Jedi and the Republic were stretched thin across too many places at once, and Starlight Beacon was crowded with refugees, evacuees, and survivors of the Eiram cyclone. The station was full of exactly the people it was built for. Then Ro sent 3 zealots aboard. Their names were Kale, Lael, and Werera, and they brought 7 nameless creatures onto the station with them. What those creatures did to Starlight is the heart of the horror. Their presence disoriented and weakened every Jedi aboard, cutting each of them off from the Force, and that single effect did 2 jobs at once. It stripped the greatest defenders in the galaxy of their abilities at the precise moment those abilities mattered most. It also meant none of them could sense that anything was wrong, so nobody raised an alarm. The saboteurs walked through a station full of Jedi who were sick, unsteady, and blind, and they had all the time they needed. They also opened 2 cells. The first prisoner was Nan, a gifted spy and informant who had previously worked directly for Marchion Ro. The second was Chansey Yarrow, the engineer whose gravity well work had already reshaped what the Nihil could do. The saboteurs freed them partly because they wanted the help, and partly to honor Haig, a comrade of Nan's, who had been lost earlier. There was one more person who knew what was coming. Gira Staros, a Republic senator quietly working with the Nihil, had advance warning of the attack and sent a team of her own Nihil aboard to collect her daughter Avon before the worst of it started. A sitting senator got her child off the station and let everyone else find out the hard way. The saboteurs set off a bomb. The explosion tore through the engineering station and released an enormous amount of radiation, which effectively split Starlight Beacon into 2 halves, an upper and a lower, with a stretch in between that nobody could cross. The station began drifting out of orbit and down toward Eiram, a planet still putting itself back together after the cyclone. Then the Nameless were released into the corridors. Jedi across Starlight were hunted through their own home and turned into calcified husks, the same way Loden Greatstorm had been undone on Grizal, and once again, nobody could name what was doing it. The people on the lower half managed to establish outside communications with help from the vessel and its crew, which is the only reason the rest of the galaxy learned what was happening while it was still happening. Without that link, Starlight Beacon would have gone quiet and come down with nobody outside knowing why. Estala Maru did something that should be impossible. Starlight's head of operations reached out with the Force and held the two halves of a collapsing space station together by himself, and he kept holding, alone, for as long as his body would let him. Avar Kriss arrived and activated her network, connecting the Jedi still aboard so they could take some of the weight off him. Her team had come straight from no space, and they went to work evacuating the top half, guiding people toward the Ataraxia or into escape pods. Then they lost the Ataraxia because Lorna D got free in the confusion and took the ship. The top half separated from the lower half, fell into Eiram's atmosphere and burned, and everyone still aboard went with it. Estala Maru was aboard when the top section came apart. Down on the lower half, order fell apart. Different groups had completely different ideas about how to get off. None of the ideas were compatible, and fights broke out that made the situation worse for everybody. In the middle of that, Belzetafar did the single most heroic thing anyone managed that night. He rigged an explosion that separated the medical tower from the rest of the station and got every patient inside it across to an Eiram medical vessel. Buriaga Agaburi vanished during a Rathtar attack as the station fell, and everyone assumed the worst. Bell refused to accept it and became convinced his friend was still alive somewhere. He happened to be right about that, though it takes a long time to matter. Now the part of this story that hurts the most. Chancey Yarrow and Nan worked out something nobody else had, which is that Starlight Beacon could still be saved. The thrusters could be brought back online, and if they fired, they would arrest the fall. The two of them made their way to the controls at the bottom of the station and started working the problem. Werera, Kale, and Lael found them there and attacked, and the two women fought all three of Ro's own agents and finished them. Understand what that means. Two people who had been Nihil, one of whom had personally worked for Marchion Ro, took down his hand-picked saboteurs in order to save a Republic station full of Jedi, and they very nearly got it done in time. Elzar Mann reached them at the wrong moment. He had come down through the station and passed a Nameless on the way, so he was already cut off from the Force, already unable to feel anything about anyone around him. He saw two known Nihil at the station controls in the middle of a sabotage operation, and he drew the only conclusion available to him. He struck Chancey Yarrow down with his lightsaber. Only after it was done did he understand what she had actually been doing there, and by then, Starlight Beacon had passed the point where anything could be done. Nan ran for it while she still could. A Jedi Master, blinded by a creature his own order had deliberately erased from its records, ended the one person in the galaxy who could have saved the station because he could not sense who she was. Every failure of this entire era arrives in that one swing. Stellan Gios got to the controls after that. The thrusters were beyond repair, and the station was going to come down no matter what anyone did. So he took manual control and made the only decision left, which was choosing where it landed. Below Starlight was a populated city on a coast. Gios steered the falling station away from it and put it into Eiram's ocean, and he stayed at the controls to do it. The city was spared complete destruction. The impact still threw up enormous waves that battered the coastal areas, and it destroyed the water purification plant, which undid the exact relief work the station had come to Eiram to perform. Ships had received word through the vessel and arrived in time to watch it happen and nothing more. The Jedi who reached the surface joined the rebuilding effort along the coasts, and every Nameless still aboard was destroyed with the station. The list of those lost that night reads like a roll call of the era. Stellan Gios, who chose the ocean, Estelam Maru, who held a station together with his own will, Ola Jareni, Nib Asek, and Nuran Bakarakana, all three taken by the Nameless and left as husks. There was Jedi Rigald Kol as well, Chansey Yarrow, who was trying to save all of them, the three saboteurs who started it. Elsewhere in the same year, Imgri and Imgri's Padawan at the Chespia Temple, and a captured Jedi named Obratuk Glee aboard the Gaze Electric. Ro explained to Glee in careful detail exactly how he had come out on top of both the Republic and the Jedi Order, walked him through all of it, and only then handed him to one of the Nameless. He needed an audience more than he needed a victory, and that is the clearest look at him anyone ever gets. There was a second half to the plan that almost nobody knows about. Ro had given Kriss Camerat, and later Camerat's collaborator Sabata Krill, a long assignment on the core world of Corellia. The Nihil had been growing their influence there quietly for a while, bringing in new members and spreading their ideas with help from Corellian elites like Nomar Tralmat. Krill's cell then manufactured a distraction, stirring up a union dispute on Corellia's moon of Gus Talon by staging attacks and blaming protesters for them, which successfully pulled the Corellian Jedi and the Corellian security forces away from Corellia itself. None of that was the operation itself, since all of it was set up. The real plan was waiting for Starlight Beacon to fall. Once it did, the Nihil would steal a fleet of MPO-1400 Purgil-class star cruisers and Republic Longbeam cruisers being built at the Santhi shipyards in Coronet City, fly them to Starlight disguised as Republic relief ships, and bomb the station a second time. A group of Jedi traveling to Corellia uncovered the whole thing through undercover work and patient espionage, and they did something the Jedi rarely get credit for, which is rallying ordinary Corellian citizens to stand and fight with them. Facing resistance they had not planned for, the Nihil adjusted their target. Instead of bombing the beacon before it came down, they would bomb the wreckage and the areas around it, which in plain terms means the survivors and the people trying to rescue them. What followed is called the Battle of the Corellian Shipyards, and the Jedi and their Corellian contingent won it, disabling or destroying the ships the Nihil intended to take. With their leaders on Corellia captured or gone, and a large portion of their fighters lost, the cell broke apart and scattered. One more thing happened on Corellia in 230 BBY. Yoda reappeared, after vanishing without explanation for more than a year, to help his former Padawan Kantam Sai and other Jedi fight the Nihil. He arrived with Azlin Rel at his side. Then Marchion Ro introduced himself to the galaxy. He put out a broadcast announcing that he was the leader of the Nihil and laying out what he intended to do next. That single transmission is the payoff of a deception that had been running for years because the Jedi had spent this entire war convinced they were fighting Lorna D. They had chased her, captured her, and believed her escape was their greatest problem. Ro had never appeared on their board at all. Every plan the Order made had been built around the wrong person, and the man who actually held the leash had been watching them do it. Lorna D had been useful to him precisely because she was visible. Chancellor Lina So wanted to hit back and ask the Jedi Council for help, and the Council refused her. The Order issued a recall beacon instead, calling all Jedi out of the Outer Rim and back to Coruscant, in direct response to the Nihil turning the Nameless into a weapon. Master Vader explained the reasoning plainly. They were bringing their people home to keep them safe. The Jedi were not frightened, but careful, and they would not spend lives rushing at an enemy whose capabilities appeared to be built specifically to neutralize everything a Jedi can do. Senator Noor heard that and said what a great many people were thinking, which is that the Jedi were afraid and the situation was hopeless. Both readings have something to them, and the galaxy had to live with the result either way. So the Republic went out alone. So sent the Republic Defense Coalition Outreach Fleet to strike back at the Nihil, and Ro was waiting for exactly that. He had developed storm seeds, technology derived from Chancey Yarrow's work, capable of destroying starships traveling through hyperspace anywhere the seeds were active. He used them to wipe out the entire Outreach Fleet in one stroke. Then he raised the Stormwall. The storm seeds formed a barrier nobody could cross, sealing off 10 full sectors of the Outer Rim from the rest of the galaxy. And everything behind it became the Occlusion Zone, which people also called the Exclusion Zone, the free sectors, the liberated worlds, and Nihil space. Republic presence in the region was cut off outright, and the Nihil became the controlling power over 10 sectors of inhabited space. They had stopped being raiders. They were a government now, and Ro set up his headquarters in the Hetzal system, the same system the Jedi had saved during the Great Disaster, purely to make a point. 1 week after the fall, members of the Jedi High Council, including Yarael Poof, stood in the Senate building and presented a set of initiatives to the Order. They told the assembled Jedi what the Nihil had done at the Great Disaster and at Valo. They named the ones who had been lost: Stellan Gios, Orla Jarini, and Nib Asek, and Loden Greatstorm before them, the last of those to the Nameless. They gave the Order the name Marchion Ro. They explained the Stormwall and the territory now sitting behind it. The Guardian protocols were initiated to keep the Order safe and prepared against this threat. And the Council spent part of that same meeting objecting to Yoda working alongside Azlin Rel, a fallen Jedi who had gone to the dark side, even after Yoda assured them Rel could help the Order learn how to defeat the Nameless. Yoda was now openly consorting with a Darksider to recover knowledge that Yoda himself had ordered, struck from the archives 152 years earlier. Avar Kriss disappeared behind the Stormwall. Elzar Mann led the search for her, and the two of them would not see each other again for over a year. 10 sectors went dark, with millions of people inside them, and no way to reach any of it. The Order pulled back to Coruscant to keep itself intact. The Republic that had promised to reach the farthest planet on the edge of the Rim could no longer reach most of the Rim at all. The golden age of the Jedi ended the night their beacon came down. The galaxy woke up divided. Behind the Stormwall, Marchion Ro ruled 10 sectors, and his followers did whatever occurred to them on any given morning, which is a difficult way to run anything. That problem was noticed first by Gira Staros, the senator who had traded her seat for a place at his side. She proposed scrapping the Tempest system entirely and replacing it with ministries, because in her assessment, the Nihil were lawless enough to collapse in on themselves within months without some kind of structure. She was probably right. A group organized entirely around taking things has no obvious method for running the places it has taken. Ro let her build the structure anyway, and then he stalked it in the pettiest way available to him. Starros became Minister of Information, and she was the only person in the room with any real interest in turning the Nihil into a functioning government. Minister of Protection went to General VS, whose interest began and ended with hunting Jedi. The third seat went to Bulan, who cared about his own experiments and whose work kept getting in the way of the Jedi hunting VS wanted to do. Ro admitted openly that his ministers were Tempest runners wearing new titles, and he had appointed the other two partly out of spite toward Starros for suggesting the idea in the first place. It is worth sitting with how strange that is. The man had conquered 1/10 of Republic space, and he was still running his organization like somebody settling scores in a family argument. Nothing about how he governed suggested he ever expected to be governing. Life under that arrangement was hard in a very simple way. The Nihil demanded tithes in exchange for food, and worlds that could not pay went hungry. Avar Kriss spent that stretch trapped inside the zone, moving from planet to planet under a cloak with her identity hidden, stealing Nihil shipments and handing the contents to whoever needed them. Porter Engel was in there too, a Jedi known across the region as the Blade of Bardota, and he worked out something clever. Getting a message past the Stormwall was impossible with current technology, so he went looking for technology that was not current. And he found it in the communication droids the old Pathfinder teams had used centuries earlier, when the Republic first pushed into the frontier. A blockade built to catch modern traffic is not calibrated to notice something that obsolete. He had to do all of it while staying ahead of General VS. Other threats grew inside the zone. The Children of the Storm rose up as a Nihil youth movement, and behind everything, always, were the Nameless. Valo was swallowed whole and pulled behind the Stormwall, and during that attack, a Jedi youngling named Gavi watched a Nameless take his master Abal in front of him. He got out and survived for months in the ruins of the Lonisa City Zoo, alongside 2 other younglings, Kildo and Tep Tep. 3 children living in a wrecked exhibit on an occupied world. Outside the barrier, Elzar Mann, Bel Zetifar, and others worked alongside the Republic, trying to reach the worlds that had gone dark. Every single attempt to breach the Stormwall failed. Even sending a message across it was impossible, so the people inside had no way of knowing anyone was trying. Then came the anniversary of Starlight Beacon's fall. Gira Starros gave public assurances that the Nihil would not mark the occasion with an attack, and she may even have believed that when she said it. Marchion Ro had something else prepared. He broadcast the Leveler taking a captured Jedi Grandmaster, Master Veter, and he pushed that broadcast out across the entire galaxy. The effect of it went well beyond one Jedi. Until that transmission, nobody outside the Nihil had ever actually seen a Nameless, and the Order had spent years losing people to something they could not describe. Ro gave the whole galaxy a clear look at it on purpose. He took the Jedi Order's greatest fear and put a face on it where everyone could see. Starros tried the other approach at the same time. She went to the Republic Senate and formally requested that Nihil space be recognized as an independent state. For a moment, the idea had some appeal because peace through paperwork is always tempting when the alternative is another decade of this. It was also obvious to everyone in that chamber that a legal settlement was not remotely what Marchion Ro was interested in. The Senate sent her home without incident, and the lack of incident was deliberate, since throwing a Nihil minister in a cell would have handed Ro exactly the propaganda he wanted. It is one of the few times in this whole story that somebody on the Republic side correctly guessed what he was doing. Recognition would have given him the one thing he had never been able to take by force, which is legitimacy. The break came from a piece of maintenance. Republic scientists studying the barrier found a single storm seed that had malfunctioned, and more importantly, they found that the rest of the Stormwall systems were not repairing it. There was a flaw in the thing everyone had accepted as flawless. Working that problem together, Elzar Mann, Avar Kriss once she got out, and the scientists Avon Sunvale and Xylan Graf developed a method for jumping through the Stormwall by hyperspace. The Jedi High Council gave full approval for the order to assist in an assault on Nihil targets inside the Occlusion zone, which is a significant reversal from the recall that had pulled everyone home. The assault on the Stormwall was launched by the Republic Defense Coalition and the Jedi together, and for the first time in years the barrier was not absolute. Worlds that had gone dark suddenly had ships arriving in their skies that were not Nihil. Ro answered by making the problem bigger. Performing outrage at both the assault and at the Senate's refusal to grant the Nihil representation, he had the storm seeds physically moved outward, which expanded the occlusion zone instead of defending it. That expansion swallowed several star systems, 2 entire sectors, and half of the Seswena sector, stopping just short of Eriadu. 2 Republic Defense Coalition operatives, Pika Adren and Jos Adren, were investigating an apparently abandoned Nihil ship along the old border when the line moved past them, and they found themselves behind enemy territory without having gone anywhere. After Avar Kriss escaped, Ro kept doing it, moving the wall again and again in patterns that looked completely haphazard to anyone watching from the outside. At its largest, the occlusion zone held nearly 10% of Republic space. It had grown to cover most of the Chommel sector in the mid-rim, and that included Naboo. Kriss got out through a daring escape of her own making, and she and Elzar Mann were reunited after more than a year apart. Both of them were carrying the same weight, which was the belief that they had failed to protect the galaxy, and underneath that, the loss of Stellan Gios. What they did with it was go straight back in. They led a mission into Nihil space to liberate Naboo, and the goal was not only to free one planet, it was to prove to every world sitting behind that barrier that the Jedi had not written them off and were still coming. Naboo was liberated from Nihil rule by the Jedi Order in 228 BBY, and word of it traveled. An occupation only works while the people underneath it believe nobody is coming, and that belief had just been broken in front of an entire sector. That year is full of operations like it. There was the Battle of Seswena and the raid on the Corvix Vaughn, which freed a great many prisoners. There was the takeover, the occupation, and the assault on Naboo. Missions ran to Oishin, Angoth, Tolis, Minos III, Palagosal, and Kashyyyk. Resistance networks were forming inside the zone as well, without any coordination from outside. Visma Tarko, Elping Tsu, and the Adrens built an alliance between them. On Valo, Gavi Takitakan and Ram Jomaram threw in with a ragtag band of pirates to push the Nihil off their world. On Corellia, Alice Ongwa, who everyone called Crash, hunted Nihil commanders and then did something nobody expected by joining forces with her own enemy, Kriss Camerat, because both of them wanted Marchion more than they wanted each other. Other threads were converging on the same problem from different directions. Zine Morala and Jedi Knight Court, working on Eriadu, turned up evidence that friends presumed lost in the fall of Starlight Beacon might have survived after all. At the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, Jedi Knight Reith Silas and Padawan Amadeo Azadzo dug into research on the Echo Stones, ancient artifacts rumored to strengthen a being's connection to the Force, hoping to find something that could counter the Nameless. Marchion was chasing the same subject from the opposite side. He allied with Volgarat, a mercenary who had once worked for the Path, and ordered the Nihil to attack Banshee to recover a certain journal about the Nameless, written 150 years earlier. Digging through the ruins of the Banshee Jedi Temple, the Nihil and Garat actually found it after Ro himself had already left. What they did not account for was a droid. ZZ-10 was still active, still guarding what it had been given, and it stalled Garat long enough to send a distress call to Jedi Master Arkov, who arrived with Savina Besatrix Malagan and recovered both the journal and the droid. While all of that was happening, something else was eating the galaxy. The Blight had begun appearing on worlds at random, and by 228 BBY, it was spreading. What it does is straightforward and horrifying, because wherever it appears, it devours everything, and a world it takes hold of has to be given up. Entire populations needed evacuating. It first surfaced publicly on the moon of Arli, where the residents were trapped in place by the Nihil, while the ground itself turned against them. On Kethis, Padawan Amadeo Azadzo and Master Miro Lox worked with the Republic Defense Coalition to clear a settlement in its path, and they ran into the problem that always comes with evacuations, which is people who do not want to leave their homes for a danger they cannot yet see. Nobody had an explanation to offer them either, because nobody yet knew what the Blight was or where it had come from. Now for the truth about all of it, and this is the part that reorganizes everything that came before. The Blight was an ancient hunger, sitting in a void between the light and the dark sides of the Force, held inside a Force nexus on the planet Sophros. Out of that nexus evolved the Shrikarai, which is the real name of the creatures the galaxy called the Nameless, and their eggs were produced by the Vergence itself. Those creatures fed on equal amounts of light and dark, and the two opposing energies working through them together are what kept the hunger sealed where it was. That is what they were doing on that planet for who knows how long. They were not guarding a prison. They were the prison. So when the Shrikarai started being carried off their home world, the balance began to tilt. It held for a long time, until the numbers dropped past a point where the ones still there could no longer contain what was underneath them, and the hunger got out. The Blight erupted across worlds that had never heard of Sophros. Worse, every Shrikarai lost anywhere in the galaxy made the Blight stronger, because each one was part of what had been holding the line. Say it as plainly as it deserves to be said. The Nameless were never monsters. They were closer to an immune system, and the galaxy had spent a century and a half treating them as a weapon. One was taken to punish the Jedi. Hundreds were taken to destroy them. a grieving 15-year-old and her descendant, working from opposite motives, between them unchained the exact thing the Path was warned about on that planet by a man who saw it and was ignored. Elzar Mann worked out most of it and explained it in terms anyone can follow. The beings everyone assumed were mindless animals are not mindless at all, and they are sentient, though not in a way that maps onto how sentience usually works. Their world is a force nexus where enormous amounts of light and dark gather in the same place, and the Nameless channel those energies and hold them in balance, which is the whole of what they have and the whole of what they need. When Marchion pulled them out of that place, he did not create monsters so much as produce them, because those creatures became maddened, starving, and enslaved, with their own minds swallowed by a hunger they could no longer satisfy. Even the planet's name says it, since Sophros translates as the balance. It formed around two force vergences, one dark down in the depths and one of light on the surface, and the creatures kept the two in equilibrium by eating what lived there. Every terrible thing those creatures did across the galaxy was the behavior of something taken out of the only place where its instincts made sense. Understanding that gave the Jedi a mission with a real solution attached. The Order marshaled an expedition to Sophros to bring the Nameless home and stop the blight at its source. 12 of them were gathered for the return trip, all creatures the Republic Defense Coalition had taken off the Nihil. Even collecting them was dangerous, and while they were being held on Coruscant, a frightened soldier freed one from its pallet, and Jedi Master Arkov lost a leg, which cost him his place on the mission he had helped make possible. 9 Jedi were selected to make the journey, led by Avar Kriss and Elzar Mann, and they were called the Luminous 9. Torban Buck took the seat Arkov could no longer fill. The inclusion of Aslan Rel was controversial for reasons everyone understood, and Jedi Knight Wreath Silas defended it. The High Council also quietly assembled a backup team in case the first one failed, made up of Vernestra Ruo, Torban Buck, Seret, Indira Stokes, Kohmak Vitus, Lily Tora Asi, Zaviel Tep, Kirak Infil-A, and Yarael Poof, and Buck privately called them the other 9. The briefing was held in the Room of 1,000 Fountains. While that expedition was preparing, the war reached its final battlefield, and the galaxy could not have picked a more fitting one. Ro's expansion of the Stormwall had annexed half the Siswena sector, which left Eriadu sitting directly on the border of Nihil territory. The Nihil marshaled an invasion, claimed the planet, and then moved the wall again to bring Eriadu inside the zone. On the surface, the occupation looked almost tidy, since the world superficially carried on. Look closer, and buildings across Eriadu City and neighboring Brifrang City had been reduced to rubble, with homes burned down to their frames. The Battle of Eriadu was fought in 228 BBY, with the Galactic Republic, the Jedi Order, and the Eriaduans on one side and the Nihil on the other for control of the planet. Every side involved treated it as the fight that would settle the question. It was an exceptionally brutal fight, and both sides had reasons for that. The Eriaduans were a combative people to begin with. They had been sitting under an occupation on their own soil, and they finally had somewhere to put all of it. The Nihil were furious in their own right at watching one of their major safe zones turn into a battlefield. Factions from outside who wanted the Nihil gone arrived and joined in. Look at what Eriadu had been through to get to that day. This is the world that lost 1.2 billion people when a fragment of the legacy run struck its moon, the world whose governor promised Kasav Miliko that her people were hunters and that the Nihil had become the prey, the world that showed up at the Kur Nebula to make good on it. 4 years later, the same people ended the entire conflict on their own ground. A young Wilhuff Tarkin is said to have fought there as well, which is a name that means a great deal later. The battle ended in a Nihil surrender. At the same moment, on the other side of the galaxy, the Luminous Nine reached Sophros. Marchion Ro followed them there because he had understood what the mission meant and had decided he preferred the alternative. To hold on to what he had built, he was willing to let the blight consume every world in existence, and he acted on it, ending at least one of the returned Shrikarai on the surface and making the problem worse in the process. The Great Leveler, the creature his family had revered for 6 generations, came to its end on that planet. Then Ro destroyed his own flagship above the world, and the Gaze Electric came apart in orbit. That turned out to be the most consequential thing he ever did by accident, because the Gaze Electric had been powering the Stormwall, and with the ship gone, the barrier came down permanently across 10 sectors. Somewhere in that wreckage was a set of quarters where 150 years earlier, a teenage girl had hidden a Jedi's lightsaber under a neat pile of robes. The family story started aboard that ship, and it finished aboard that ship. The Jedi defeated Marchion Ro and took him into custody on Sophros. Then Avar, Kriss, and Elzar Mann made a decision that gets remembered by almost nobody. The blight still needed holding back, and the balance between light and dark on that world still needed maintaining, and the two of them stayed to do it. They did not come home. The greatest Jedi of their generation, the hero of Hetzal, and the man who had steered his order through its worst years, became permanent custodians of a wound the galaxy would never be told about. The blight was contained on Sophros, and its threat to everyone else ended there. The shuttle carrying the other 9 came in and retrieved the surviving members of the Luminous Nine. Azlin Rel escaped Jedi custody during all of this and disappeared, and he was never accounted for again. The trial of Marchion Ro was held around 228 BBY in the Senate building on Coruscant. The charges included the destruction of Starlight Beacon and the attempted destruction of every living being in existence, which is not a phrase that comes up often in a courtroom. Ro spent the proceedings mocking the Senate as an institution incapable of doing anything, and he never once claimed regret for any of it. The sentence they handed down is one of the strangest in galactic history. The court found that he had forfeited his opportunity to live among other sentient beings and gave him a life of solitary imprisonment. He would be taken to a facility in deep space, staffed only by droids, stocked with enough supplies to last the rest of his life. The facility would be built by those droid stewards at a location the droids themselves chose at random, and only the Supreme Chancellor and the Jedi High Council would ever know where it was. He would interact with nobody, and there would be no possibility of parole. The man who spent his entire life making the galaxy look at him was sentenced never to be seen again. With their leader gone, the Nihil surrendered and came apart. The Occlusion zone was dissolved, and the worlds inside it were liberated, and the organization fragmented into pieces that could not hold together. Every world behind the old barrier was welcomed back into the Republic if it wanted to come back. some of them declined. They had spent years discovering that the Republic could not reach them, and they preferred to keep the independence they had learned to live with. Others stayed under the control of individual Nihil warlords who had never left. The Battle of Yavin and the mission to Sophros together mark the end of the Nihil conflict. And the conflict was never formally declared a war, so it does not get remembered as one despite everything it did. Chancellor Lina understood exactly what she was looking at. In her own assessment, the successes the Nihil had against the Republic, combined with the decision of some worlds to stay out afterward, had accomplished something no raid ever could. The Nihil had created real doubt in the promise of the Republic, and in doing so, they opened the door to the idea of secession. That is the actual ending of this story. The High Republic does not close with the Republic winning cleanly. It closes with the Republic having proven to its own frontier that it cannot protect them, and with worlds openly deciding they would rather manage on their own. The idea that eventually tears the galaxy in half is born right there, centuries before anyone gives it a name. The Nihil themselves are remembered as the primary threat the era faced, and their existence complicates every attempt to describe this period as a time of peace. Their technology outlasted them, since the design of the Path engine survived into later eras, and so did their rhetoric and their imagery long after the group itself stopped mattering. That fading happened fast. By 200 BBY, a Jedi Padawan named Sean could recall the Nihil only as an illicit organization that had once invaded the Galactic Republic. 4 generations, and the most dangerous force of the age was a footnote in a lesson. Much later, the historian Kin, writing a study of the rise and fall of the Empire, looked back at the Nihil conflict as one of the High Republic government's failing points, while still admiring the era as a time when the galaxy banded together against something that threatened all of it. Both of those readings are defensible, which is usually the sign that a period is being remembered honestly. The era itself kept going for roughly another 128 years after Yavin. By 132 BBY, the age was fading, and the change was visible in the Jedi themselves. Generations without any Sith activity had made the Order relaxed about hunting dark side threats, exactly as it had been since the day they concluded that Ancient Enemy was finished. In that gap, a figure known as the Stranger began searching for an acolyte of his own, working in the quiet the Order had left him. The Sith had been there the entire time, 2 at a time, master and apprentice, passing power quietly down a line the Jedi believed they had ended. The High Republic era formally closed around 100 BBY, and the Republic that comes out the other side of it is a slower, more corrupt, more comfortable thing, 68 years away from handing the chancellorship to a senator from Naboo.